Welcome, everyone, to the Anatomy of a Film podcast. This is episode 3. We are discussing La Dolce Vita today. With me, as always, is Eugenio. I am Bill Griff, and we are missing someone this episode, actually. Our third member, a little souffle, who is currently dealing with his Manhattan shenanigans. He truly is living the 4D experience, the La Dolce Vita life. So, in a sense, he is with us in spirit, but alas, he's not here to give his thoughts on the film. But, Eugenio, how are you feeling? How do you feel about the lack of souffle? I think we'll be okay tonight.
We'll be okay, but he's always missed. There's always a bit in my heart for my boy Lil Souffle.
I mean, we've been, for you guys watching this episode, or if you're keeping up to date, or if you're just returning from an older episode, we've actually taken a quite a long time to get to where we're at right now with recording. That's an
Yep,
understatement, truly.
you have no idea.
We've basically had a sabbatical in between Wanda and La Dolce Vita.
Yep.
I myself have been able to rewatch this film multiple times. I've kind of convinced myself to really appreciate the movie because I will be honest, before we get into everything, I have seen this film before. We recorded this episode and I was a bit indifferent on it, but on this rewatch, on the third rewatch, my mind has been expanded. I've started to speak a little Italian. I've adopted the language quite naturally. How do you feel, Yanio? Because this was your first time watching the movie.
It was. This is my first time watching this movie. I was a bit nervous going into it, but we'll see. We'll see in the discussion what we both have to say about it. It's a very
It's a movie. Yeah, it truly
it's one of
is.
those it's one of those you go to the theater type movies.
Yeah, not even escape the theater. I wouldn't escape the theater if I watched this movie. While we're on the topic of films, I
Of course.
I might as well open up the floor, maybe a little icebreaker before we get into the La Dolce Vita. Is there a movie in particular that has wowed you in the last week?
Well, I haven't been watching that many movies recently, but I managed to watch The Manchurian Candidate, directed by John Frankenheimer. Just like you, I'm a big fan of his other film, Seconds. I actually watched it twice this year already, and so I was very excited going into The Manchurian Candidate. I had heard a lot of things, and it's surprisingly very relevant, even if it's a film that is a little bit dramatic and it has a lot of superficial action. I am not gonna get into why in here because this is not a maturing candidate podcast, but
Of course.
I have a letterbox review that I wrote a few days ago that I think really encapsulates my opinions on the film well. I watched Jour de Fête, the first Jacques Tati film, for the first time.
Ooh, that's cool. That I remember you
Yeah,
telling me about that the day you watched it.
it's a very fun film. It's only accredited as being, I think, by Godard of all people. He said that the film is like one of the first, if not the first, film of French neorealism in the post-war era. And it's I watched. There's many versions. I watched the colored version, and I think it's a very charming movie, while at the same time managing to still have something interesting to say.
Yeah, I mean, most of Jacques Tati's films are genuinely a fun time, but also they explore all these political themes that feel timeless. I myself have not seen Jeux de Filles yet, but I have seen Mononcle, and that is one of the most bombastically silly films I've seen in my life. Um, from what I have read about Jacques Tati, I don't know much about the guy, but he basically spent most of his money and I think even went bankrupt just to pursue this filmmaking career that he had. And so his entire life was given to the art form. And for that, I have to just respect the man for just going 110% every time in trying to just bring a little joy and life to the world through film. So I,
For
I
sure.
really, really love Jacques Tati, and I really need to see more films from him, particularly. Joe Defi and Trafic. Need to see that one too.
Yeah, for sure. He's one of the most fascinating cinematic voices of the 20th century. Have you seen any movies recently?
Yeah, I was about to think about a movie I'd like to talk about. The two films I can think of instantly that I really appreciate that I saw in the last week or so is Silence of the Lambs, a rewatch, and then I rewatched Manhunter by Michael Mann a
Mm.
couple days after. Both of them are rewatches, but I haven't seen the movies for a few years, at least two or three for Manhunter, but for Silence of the Lambs, gosh, I haven't seen that movie since I was 13 or 14 years old. It's been a
Oh wow.
minute. So it essentially felt like a brand new watch to me because I remember the snippets of Hannibal Lecter and the cramped cells and the tight close-ups of him and Jodie Foster, but I forgot about just how flawless the movie really is, honestly. I was completely entertained and enthralled immediately after I finished it. I made sure to pick up the Criterion for it because I feel like Silence of the Lambs is often pinned as a dad movie or like a normie film in the movie community. Like a lot of, at least for deep rooted cinephiles, they like to consider that as up there with, I don't know, other 90s classics like Shawshank Redemption or The Green Mile or I don't know, films like that. Ironically, all three films involve a prison system, but Silence of the Lambs truly is a masterpiece. Like every praise it gets, every ounce of that is completely deserved. And yeah, after rewatching that, I immediately wanted to rewatch Manhunter, which is technically the original adaptation of the Hannibal Lecter novels, Red Dragon. That movie was just as great. Not It's hard to compare the two because they're two completely different stories. One follows Will Graham, who is a FBI profiler, while the other one stars a Jodie Foster's character, Clarice,
Trace
who is
Earning. Yeah.
yes, who is just still in training, and both of them do involve Lecter, of course, but Manhunter definitely keeps him on the back burner for the most part. Brian Cox, though, delivers an incredible performance as him. Really great.
Hmm.
I don't know. I just really liked both those films and appreciate them a lot more on a rewatch, and it just goes to show that rewatching a movie does put it in a different lens, especially as you get older and kind of mature. I feel like I
Hmm.
was able to pick up on the themes a lot better. Yeah, I just really appreciate both those films quite a bit.
Yeah.
Have you seen Manhunter?
No, I haven't. I've seen Silence of the Lambs a few times. I love Silence of the Lambs. It's one of those childhood movies I'm fond of. Yeah, I've never seen Manhunter. The only thing about it that I knew was that it stars Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter and
Yes.
that it is directed by Michael Mann. Those are the only two things I knew. I still know about it, but I would definitely like to give it a watch one day, maybe sometime soon. Maybe the next time I watch Silence of the Lambs because I've been meaning to rewatch it because I haven't seen it in a couple of years as well.
Well, if it helps, it is leaving the Criterion channel this month,
Cool.
so you do have that amount of time to watch it for free, or I should say for whatever the subscription amount is. I think it's 10.99 or something in the States. But
Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, I don't know. I'm just still reeling in from those films. Really appreciate them, but I think I'm about ready to try to tackle La Dolce Vita. It's a fucking long movie. It's almost I think it's 3 hours long even,
Yeah,
and
like 256, something like that. Yeah.
cheese and rice. We've got a lot to tackle. I think you should take it away since this, after all, your rec. Um, yeah, where do you want to start?
Yeah. So before we start, I just wanted to give some like a little bit of context surrounding the film, and Fellini. Of course, the film is directed by Fellini. This was the film that sent him into international stardom. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including writing and directing, even though it was not nominated for foreign film. It was a huge box office success, earning $20 million at the box office and launching Fellini into, as I say, the heights of international cinematic fame. A little bit of a tidbit is that it was also Roger Ebert's favorite film, and the review he wrote when revisiting it for his The Great Movies book series is very moving, and I really recommend reading it. And yeah, La Dolce Vita is one of those films that have managed to make their way into the popular consciousness, and I didn't know this until I watched it, but so many films and so many assumptions we take about filmmaking and even life in general just originated from this film. Of course, this is Fellini's most famous movie. It stars Marcello Mastroianni as Marcello Rubini. It also has Anita Ekberg as Sylvia, Anouk Aimée as Madalena, who, rest in peace, just passed away recently.
R.I.P.
Yvonne Furneaux as Emma. But yeah, those would be the main ones. It was written by many people, including of course Fellini and Ennio Flaiano, Tullio Pinelli, Brunello Rondi, and someone who I'm pretty sure just did a little bit of the writing, but he's still credited as a writer, was Pier Paolo Pasolini. Um,
Oh, definitely. I'm trying to think what part of La Dolce Vita did he write? Like, what was his contribution to the script?
I have
Um,
no idea.
my
Mm,
guess, I could. Well, you know what? I'll guess it when we get to the scene. So that
yeah, given the themes of Catholicism all present throughout the film, it wouldn't surprise me if he was related to that. The music was written and composed by Nino Rota, who also very
oh,
famously did the Godfather score.
absolute icon. Absolute icon.
Yes,
Love his scores, especially The Godfathers, but also his score in La Dolce Vita was pretty great.
it really is one of those pieces of music that encapsulates this whole style and this take on the city of Rome. You can really feel it through that very catchy score, I think. Just to finish naming the main other players, the main editor was Leo Catozzo, and the cinematographer was Otello Martelli. Producers were Giuseppe Amato, Angelo Rizzoli, Nello Meniconi, and Manlio Morelli. Hundreds of other people worked in the film. Those are some of the ones in the most recognizable positions, if you will.
All of those are pretty key people that have worked with Fellini for most of his career, right? Like his cinematographer and editor both worked on all of his films, like La Strada and um, I,
Mm-hmm.
Vitel- I Vitelloni.
Yeah, Fellini is one of those directors that had, well, maybe not for every film, but he did reuse a lot of his collaborators. It's part of why the phrase Fellinesque for what's become so idiosyncratic as Fellini is such a big thing, you know? It's like all these people's visions, not only Fellini's, but of course Fellini's leading them, was the thing that created such an idiosyncratic style throughout all his films. Another thing is I two people I wanted to dive into a little bit. I wanted to dive into Fellini's backstory just a little bit, or like his story growing up. No, maybe not that much because we're gonna get to dive into Fellini a lot more in this podcast. But one of them is Fellini, and the other one once I wanted to mention is Marcello Mastroianni. Fellini grew up. He grew up. I don't remember the city, but he grew up in what at the time in the 1920s was a small town in the Italian like coast. His mother was from Roman bureaucracy, while his father was more of a. I think his father was a teacher. He was not as wealthy as his mother's family. His father's family was not as wealthy as his mother's. So this creates this sort of duality within Fellini's work, where you can see in films like Rome Open City, which he wrote, where he focuses more on people who are struggling, and then he approaches something so different in movies like La Dolce Vita, where he's fascinated by this completely other world. And that, I think that's pretty interesting. Of course, and Fellini, another interesting thing about him is he moved to Rome with his mother and started working as a comics artist, and also as a reporter. His experiences as a reporter and a journalist really influenced some of the aspects of La Dolce Vita. And it's one of those examples of how, you cannot really take Fellini out of La Dolce Vita, like one would do in most Hollywood films today, especially.
No, he had such a grip on his films. To be honest, like I could compare him to the Hitchcock of Italy,
Hmm.
even though the two made completely different films tonally. They were just so prevalent in the creative process of their works. Fellini very much had a. It's like after La Dolce Vita was released, because that was his big break. He got full creative freedom for all of his films, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know. He's always had a foothold.
Yeah, it's the auteur theory in practice.
Yeah,
It's one of those filmmakers, yeah, whose mind itself and whose style is so vital to the films he makes that you can't really take him away. It's the same with somebody like Tati, who we were mentioning before, or Bresson, or Wes Anderson in today's world.
yeah. It's those guys that just pour everything into their work, and in doing so, it becomes their staple.
Hmm. Exactly. And then when it comes to Marcello, I was gonna say, this is kind of interesting, but the producers did not want to cast Marcello in the film. They wanted to cast Paul Newman.
Interesting.
Yeah, but Fellini thought he was too pretty, and he thought Mastroianni looked a lot more normal. So
Yeah.
Dino De Laurentiis, who later go on to produce films such as like Blue Velvet or Dune, and was the main producer of La Dolce Vita at the time, left the project because Fellini refused to cast Paul Newman.
Wow.
And then I think there's this story of how Fellini offered the role to Marcello. I think this is Marcello speaking, but he says, I said, well, okay, I would like to read the script, please. He, Fellini, said, why not, Ennio? Come with the script. I opened the script and there was nothing written, blank pages. Then I saw a sketch of the sea and a man swimming with an enormous. Mastroianni indicates a large phallus, so an enormous penis, and around his elements there was a dance of mermaids. I became green, red, yellow. I said, well, it seems very interesting. Where do I sign? And that's how I met Fellini.
Wow. Just give him a piece of paper that just
Yeah.
has like the dick drawings from Superbad. That's funny.
That's how one of the most iconic cinematic pairings came to be. And I wonder what Paul Newman would have said when he read those phalluses with the mermaids.
He would have found a way to get his spaghetti sauce company involved since it's
Yeah.
Italian. I knew about Paul Newman, who
Hmm.
was originally the choice for Marcello's character, but I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't know that that is the way that he was cast in the movie with the penis
The
picture. That's
phallus.
that's
Yeah.
so that's so bad. You can't do that today.
Yeah, and you can clearly see that Fellini and Marcello have this connection already, and they seem to have had a very special relationship. Lina Wertmüller, who was a great and mythical director in her own right, the first ever woman director to get nominated for an Academy Award for Best Directing.
Wow.
She was one of the crew members of La Dolce Vita, and she describes them both as rascals. And it's funny because you can see aspects of that playfulness of both Mastroianni and Fellini come out on screen, like Fellini's infamous obsession with like big sweaty asses and voluptuous women. And there's also a certain element of childlike fun in the events Marcello finds himself in. A fun that Fellini condemns while Marcello is trying to make us sympathize with, I think. But we'll get to that later in the film.
Yeah. I'd say we should just dive right in to the opening scene,
I
because I think
Yeah.
the opening scene is one of the most definitive moments in the movie. It describes basically everything we're going to see. It all encompasses
Yeah,
it, and just those short, I think it's 5 minutes is the opening sequence.
I think so. It starts very strikingly with this picture of a helicopter carrying a statue of Jesus over Rome.
Absolutely. That's such a crazy way to open the movie.
It
And
is absolutely.
I wonder, I don't know, you continue. I'll ask later.
Well, I was just gonna say a very famous interpretation is that Jesus starts from the classical aqueducts of Rome, and he moves on to the more modern and decaying, as in spirit, parts of the city. And the helicopter that's following Jesus gets easily distracted by the sight of women sunbathing. And Marcello, who is in the second helicopter, and this is our introduction to the character, loses track of Jesus, somehow leading him into this spiral that is the film. In the very first scene, we get that Marcello is like has lost Jesus, like maybe it's Fellini trying to say like Rome has lost these their values and their virtues,
Yeah.
and for the sake of lusting over these sunbathing women. And that's ironic because that's a very, if you will, like Catholic message. But the movie was trying to be condemned and be censored by a newspaper from the Vatican when it came out. We see it very commonly in today's world where people just take stuff at face value and try to censor, try to attack art that they haven't even engaged with, that just seems like it's bad when in reality is advocating for the same things as the people who are trying to condemn it. But furthermore, for this scene, we see like a lot of the themes that the film is going to explore. It's this thing with like out with the traditional Roman architecture, world, and values, out with traditional figures of morality, and into the new modern Rome, where desire takes precedence over everything else.
That's a good interpretation, I'd say, of the film because it definitely feels like we're seeing where he prioritizes his life. I
Yeah.
didn't necessarily pinpoint religion or purity or anything like that.
Hmm.
When I first saw the scene, I thought of it as this is how Fellini is going to show us his protagonist, and we are going to see exactly what he cares about. Even though
Hmm.
he is a journalist in the film, he is not following the story anymore. He once he sees any woman that is in any sort of revealing attire, he is instantly drawn to her. And he doesn't care about his job anymore. He doesn't care about his work. He doesn't care about art anymore. He's purely
Yeah.
focused on his lust. He's purely focused on just I guess yeah, the immorality is what you said and I agree with that. We can see it just wholeheartedly in his character that he already just appears to be bored with his profession. We don't even
Yeah.
exactly know what his profession is at this point, but we can just tell that he doesn't care about it and he's very unfocused in his life. He's very lost in his life too. And his first line of dialogue is what is it? It's saying ciao bella and putting like making a motion with his hands to write down a woman's phone number for him to call him. That's his first line of dialogue. Like that's the first thing we have to work with for this guy.
He's a very lustful character.
Yeah, it's very telling. He's simple. He's a simple guy, really. He doesn't have
Yeah.
any sort of I don't know. I think a lot of people read this guy the wrong way or they try to look at him with a more philosophical lens. I
Hmm.
can view this guy just as a plain, I don't know, frat guy who's just drifting through life without any sort of um
Yeah. End goal.
drive or ambition or passion. Yeah. And he's trying to find it, I think, throughout this movie. And with it, he's trying to discover it through his profession, through journalism, through learning about his city, through learning about the people around it and encountering all these different people. And of course, like you said, it's very telling that the first scene we see of him is him following God
Yeah.
and immediately losing track of it and wanting to view another form of art, which is women and their bodies.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And there's a meta aspect to it as well because not only like it's not like we stayed following the helicopter that has Jesus with it. We stayed with Marcello. We're also looking at these women. We're also like, I mean, maybe not personally, but the camera is lusting for these women as well, and so is Fellini. And this scene feels, it's almost comical, right? Because it feels like like it feels like you can divide Fellini into literally before and after this scene, before
Yeah.
Christ and after Christ, because I think this arrival of Jesus not only indicates a new, whatever we already talked about, like what it means for the film itself, but it also pinpoints to a new era in Fellini's filmmaking. He's leaving his more down to earth origins, like in Nights of Cabiria or La Strada, in favor of the more fantastical and macro approach of films like Eight and a Half and Amarcord.
Yeah. You you said that this film starts with the arrival of Jesus. I think it's the opposite. This film starts with
Do you think he's leaving?
the departure of Christ.
Yeah.
And I totally agree that this scene is exactly before Fellini, after Fellini, because this is almost him abandoning Italian neorealism for a new movement, a new interpretation of the country and where it's headed. I think that's why a lot of people, including the Vatican, were trying to ban this movie, is because it was abandoning its values, that its core values that they were holding on to post World War II. It's also interesting considering Fellini co-wrote a lot of Rossellini pictures like Rome Open City and Paisan, which are very much movies that interpret a wounded Italy, a country that's trying to recover from its war and its destruction and its destruction of its ideals that Mussolini was trying to build upon, and now they're having to just rewrite their whole history and for the betterment
Hmm.
of their future. I mean, it's a really tragic era to view Italian neorealism. You know, my favorite filmmaker from that era is Vittorio De Sica, who, ironically, the producer of La Dolce Vita, Giuseppe Amato, produced Umberto D and Bicycle Thieves. So it's really interesting seeing almost a sort of rejection of that cinema movement through this movie. But it's not it's not like he's making fun of Italian neorealism or he's satirizing it or just saying fuck you. I don't think that in the slightest. I think it's just, hey, we've been through this. We know exactly what our past is like, but this is our future. This is a lens of our future and where we're headed.
Yeah.
And so I think the movie starting with the departure of Christ is so brilliant in how he
Mhm.
is trying to just I don't know, voice this interpretation.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. I Neorealism is a topic I want to keep going back to throughout the podcast, but yeah, it's especially interesting when considering that films like Bicycle Thieves took place only 12 years before La Dolce Vita,
Crazy.
before the events happening in this movie in the same city. And of
Yeah.
course, they depict different groups of people, right? It's not like the things that happen in Bicycle Thieves couldn't happen anymore to the people living in Rome in the 1960s. But it's still very interesting to see how time and inequality shapes the movies.
It's kind of like Fellini is switching from showcasing people suffering to people suffering from success.
Yeah. And to what you were saying about Rome Open City, a very interesting thing about that film is that I think it's all about unity, you know. It's about you have these two factions, you have communists and you have Catholics, and they're almost at war. Then the occupation of Germany starts happening, the occupation of Italy by Germany. And
Yeah.
so these two sides, in order for their groups to have any sort of survival, they need to band together. And it's a call to the Italian people to say, let's put our differences aside. We should protect each other and our identity together. What I think it's fascinating is that, of course, Fellini wrote that film, or at least co-wrote it. And to what you were saying is that this film is very different. It's like drastically so in its themes and in its presentation.
I agree. It's just a really outstanding opening to a film. I think that whenever I think of La Dolce Vita now, I look back on that scene very fondly, and I think it's a really interesting opening to this new movement. Like it really does feel like a revolutionary scene for this country and their history of film. The scene that plays after is a completely
Y-
different moment in the story.
Mm-hmm.
We should preface that La Dolce Vita is kind of told in an abstract, episodic fashion. There is
Yes.
no there's no straight narrative, so it really does feel like a fractured story that's being told through moments of Marcello's life. We know it today from many filmmakers today in the States who've embodied that sort of storytelling, but back
Mm-hmm.
then in 1960, this was
Unconventional.
pretty unconventional, out of the box to tell a story in the way it does.
Yeah, just for sake of clarity, it has seven. Well, not seven. It has seven. Takes place in 7 days or 7 mornings and 7 evenings, with an epilogue, a prologue, and an intermission. The scene we discussed, the helicopter scene, that is the prologue of the film. It's setting things up, and now for the actual story to begin, which starts in the first night. In this night, Marcello is at a nightclub where he casually stumbles upon Madalena, played by Anouk Aimée. After escaping the paparazzi, they have a conversation by a fountain, not the Trevi fountain, but a random fountain. And later, they proceed to give a sex worker a ride to her home, where they spend the night together. This scene is very interesting because of how it expands on Marcello's character. And not only that, but also introduces Madalena, who's a character that will recurringly appear throughout the film. Some of the there's a lot of interesting dialogue there's between Marcello and Madalena in their fountain conversation. Marcello says that just a few unhappy people remain in Rome. That's one of his lines. That's one of the things that stayed with me. And that Madalena says that she doesn't like Rome, but Marcello says it's like a jungle. It's easy to hide in, and he loves it. And in the movie, Rome does feel like a jungle. It feels like an adventure movie where you're traveling through the Amazon, not knowing where you'll go or what you'll find. Similar to films like Embrace of the Serpent, which might seem astronomically different, but
Yeah,
it also feels like a sort of hellish underworld with all these characters and their sinning.
the way that Fellini depicts Rome at night, particularly in that first episode, does feel sort of claustrophobic, and it feels almost mysterious, like we don't know exactly where they're headed. We're just along for the journey. I completely agree with you in the fact that it almost feels like a setup to an adventure. I want to bring up the opening sequence of that episode where
Uh
Marcello
huh.
goes into the nightclub, and
Yeah.
it's revealed at that point what his job is, which is essentially a journalist, but for like kind of like a gossip magazine sort of that it's not really that deep because he is spying on a prince of royalty who's staying at that nightclub and is eating food with another woman, and he
Hmm.
it's not really revealed if that woman is his wife or not, if he's cheating, if it's some sort of scandal, but he orders his cameraman, who is his character's name is Paparazzo, which is played by Walter Santeso, who is
Yeah.
his buddy, his sidekick. We saw him earlier in the helicopter that was sitting next to him. He is kind of
Yes.
like the little gremlin guy who runs around like a little rat with a camera flashing it at anybody he points him to. And of course, in this sequence, he asks him to photograph the prince. Of course, his bodyguards shield him instantly and try to recover the film from him. And a little boy, and a man both inform Marcello what the prince has ordered. I guess just to write out the column, right, to get all the details, all the facts, and
Yeah.
make up a story surrounding this event. But I actually had no idea when I first watched this movie that paparazzo was a term that was originated in this film. It actually
Yeah.
the term we famously know as paparazzi, with TMZ in them, um, it all came from La Dolce Vita in this character named Paparazzo, and they're very conflicting reports on where the name originates. Fellini has said two explanations. Once he said it was from the word passero, which translates to sparrow, but another account is that it's phlebotomus papatatsi, which is a fancy word for a sandfly, which is a type of almost like a mosquito, essentially, but a
Mm.
sandfly. So I think it's kind of funny that it's essentially just derived from the word pest, from a type of pest or bug or bird that just will not leave you no matter how much you swat it away. And that's one of the most accurate ways to describe the entire phenomena surrounding paparazzis. This incessant need to photograph someone on a higher pedestal than yourself. And seeing that as Marcello's career, you can see why he often feels so distracted because of this constant stimuli that is his job, constantly on the move, ordering a drink as he enters a room and finishing it off as he leaves. He exists with the gust of wind that accompanies him. There's no time for him to stop and smell the roses or to try to make sense of his situation. He's merely just existing as a passerby, and seeing this scene play out, um, we get that kind of vibe. At least that's what I got.
I agree, and it's very telling in that first scene because as soon as Marcello leaves the club with Maddalena, we get a first glimpse into two very important things that happen throughout the movie. The first one being the pesky paparazzi who are everywhere and they are there all throughout the film. I don't remember if there's, I mean, I guess we'll talk about it, but I don't remember if there's a single night or 24-hour period where we don't see the paparazzis. And of course, it's important to say that this the film does not take place within a week. They are 7 separate days. It's not
Yeah,
just like a week in his life,
it's not
and
exactly, but it might as well as have
it
been a
might as
week in
well,
his
yeah,
life. With the way the pace is going, you just assume that this is his day-to-day life.
yeah. That one thing leads to another, yeah. And they leave the club via the Via Veneto, and the Via Veneto is a very famous Roman street. But in the movie, as well as many others, even though it looks like it's the real thing, it's a studio. The outside shots of the Via Veneto are all shot in a studio, and that really shocked me personally. It really, I mean, it makes sense because the lighting is so controlled. At the same time, it's very shocking because it really feels atmospherically correct.
I agree. I had no idea that it was shot in studio for that scene.
And later in the scene, when we get the conversations with the sex worker, I think it's a wild introduction to Madalena's character and a wild expansion on Marcello's. Because this is the first night of the movie, of course. And for some context, Italy had a massive economic boom during the 1950s, only rivaled by those of like Japan and West Germany. This was largely a consequence of the country's decision to turn toward the free market, which
Hmm.
in exchange amplified the gap of wealth inequality between those struggling and those who are wealthy. And it's one of the things that's present all throughout the film. And in the scene where
Hmm.
Marcello and Maddalena go to the sex worker's house, we can see how they truly don't care about her or her dignity. They have sex in her house, they have no respect for her. She lives underground in a half sunken apartment. It's like she's not even human to them because she doesn't boast or represent any of the excess they devour. And later they just leave. No confrontation or argument. She thanks them for their ride and they leave. And the consequences do not arrive until later because it is also a theme in the film. The nights are wild, and then the next day, the mornings have, well, yeah, very strict consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe parties in general, is that the nights are wild and untamed, while the mornings are very somber, quiet, reserved, and everyone kind of has that clarity to them where they understand the actions of, I guess, the consequences of their actions the next day.
Yeah,
And with these two characters, you actually don't get that sort of experience necessarily because,
no,
like you said, when they wake up, they don't care. It's like they're still living that party, sort of. They're just sober this time and have headaches and migraines, but that's about it. They're still ready for the next night.
and there's no, but there at the same time there's no ecstasy in the night, you know. It doesn't feel like, yeah, it feels like they're doing these things, they're going through these things, but it doesn't feel like what they're doing is very exciting for them, you know. It just
No.
feels like, okay, let's do it, why not.
That's what I mean when I say that Marcello lives in a world where he is under constant stimuli, and because of that, he's
Yes.
just kind of become numbed to this feeling, to this existence that he's living. Maddalena as well, because we haven't
Mm-hmm.
mentioned it yet, but her character is an heiress, so her father is extremely wealthy. She just kind of merely exists off of his money and what he funds her and her ventures. She doesn't really have any drive or goal, just like Marcello. So in a sense, the two are two sides of the same coin, but they're very different in a sense where Marcello lives for adventure and this kind of excess and this party. Maddalena almost seems melancholic. She doesn't really, it almost seems like she doesn't get any pleasure really from the night. Even when making love to Marcello, there doesn't seem to be any pleasure derived from it. Even though in the moment where they park their car and have a moment in the street, she says the only time she does feel alive is when she is making love. Well, maybe that's not even the case with her. And it's really
Yeah.
sad when you see someone like that who just feels like they're living, like they're not even living when moving through time. It's a really interesting cold open to that character that we thankfully do get to revisit later on in the film, but not for a while. There's a big gap from her appearances. She kind of exists in and out of the narrative, much like how she wants to live her life.
Yeah. And I just wanted to throw out a little praise for Anouk Aimée, who is a great actress. She's great in this movie. And if you want to watch another great film with her, watch Lola, directed by Jacques Demy. I think she gives a great performance in that movie. She plays Lola, the lead, of course.
I love her in Lola. That is such a great film. I agree.
Yes.
Definitely should check it out if you've not. I don't know why. I was through half the film's runtime, I was kind of getting her confused with Monica Vitti, the girl from L'Avventura. But Anouk is incredible in the film.
And then as we are talking about like the dawns full with consequences, we go to the next scene, which is Marcello arriving home to find his fiancee Emma, a character who's another
Oh
recurring
God.
character throughout the film, and she has
Oh yeah.
attempted suicide. So he rushes her to the hospital where he professes his love to her.
Let's just, I
Yeah.
mean, I want to talk about that real quick because that sequence is just so toxic. Oh my God.
It is, no,
It,
absolutely. They're
it
not
just,
goals.
no, not at all. I feel like that is one of the worst introductions to his fiance. And at this point in the film, we're thinking this guy's just a lifelong bachelor. And he really should be. I don't think he deserves her at all in his life.
Not at all.
And it's really sad to see her as this introduction of her character as someone who's willing to end their life for their the attention of this person.
Yeah,
Um,
just to get a little bit of, yeah, attention, as you said, from Marcello.
from
And
Marcello, and she does achieve it, but when you watch it, it's like a car crash you can't help but watch. It's just so toxic and kind of vile and icky, and it just instantly makes me kind of dislike Marcello's character because up until this point, we don't really understand what his personal life is like, and we kind of get this idea of him, but once that scene happens, you really get a definitive moment to realize, okay, this is how selfish this man is with his life. But anyways, continue with what you were going to say. Apologies for
oh no,
interrupting.
it's okay. I was just gonna add insult to injury. Because right after he leaves the hospital bed where he says he loves her, he goes out and calls Madalena. I mean, it's implied that if that it's that he's calling her to see if she's down to do anything or something like that, but she doesn't answer. She's asleep or unconscious. We just see her lying down next to the phone, but she does not answer. I think this is the best example of what I was saying earlier of, yeah, an evening of craziness followed by a dawn of consequences. And it's yeah, he's cheating on his fiance. He's he's treating this woman as a, I don't know, this woman's house as just a motel, just because he can do it, and there's not gonna be any consequences. And we see this sex worker character talking with a man outside of her apartment, saying how like she was saying like, what am I supposed to do? Kick him out? They look wealthy. And of course, her home kind of looks like reptilian even because it's all drowned. You know, yeah, they just use it for whatever they want, and then they just leave with no consequences in the moment. And the consequences don't come from treating this woman poorly. The consequences come later because, of course, he was cheating on Emma. And of course, there's this aspect that Madalena really doesn't care that much about Marcello. She just found him one day and he was like, okay, this will do for the night.
Yeah. That's what I got from her character is that Marcello is just like any other man that piques her interest just to use for a little bit, kind of like a toy and just realizing I don't want to play with you
Hmm.
anymore. And
Yeah.
I do also think that Marcello feels the same way about Maddalena. He views her as a toy to play with, and I agree with what you
I
said
think so.
to avoid the consequences of him cheating on his fiance, leading to her attempted suicide. He's avoiding that consequence and is just trying to call up Maddalena to I don't know hook up with her again or something.
Yeah.
It's
Maybe
really
to I was just gonna say maybe to pass her the blame. Maybe to be like, oh, why did you convince me to go with you last night? Blah blah blah. You know. Maybe to yell at her. It
I
doesn't seem
need
out
to,
of character.
I need to know. I need to know. That's an inside joke we have because of the whale. That's just when oh
The whale.
I don't want to get into the whale. Marcello Mastroianni as Dan the pizza guy was incredible.
We took a little break and now we're back. And we're gonna go into the next day. So the following day we see as Sylvia, a Swedish American actress, arrives in Rome. She's received by a dozen of paparazzis and reporters. Later, she leads a series of interviews before visiting St. Peter's Cathedral, where she demonstrates her energetic personality by climbing to the top, leaving the paparazzi behind. A trait that really attracts Marcello.
I think that this scene is probably one of my favorite. Sylvia arrives at the in the airplane in the airport back when you just exited out the runway, you know, down some steps, and you were met outside with the the paparazzis, everybody. It kind of plays out like a war scene, like everyone's storming the
Yes.
beach of Normandy. They're fighting their way, they're clawing their way to get as close as they can to the entrance of the airplane as she's getting out.
I was just gonna say, ironically, they're all trying to get the best shot.
Yeah, they really are trying to get the best shot. She encourages the behavior, of course, because it fuels
Mhm.
her ego and her confidence, and it just is it's just what her life has become this magnet of flashing lights. And she even goes out of her way to go back into the airplane and go come back out for another take of the photos
Yeah.
to be taken, which is super funny. I think that is one of the funniest moments in the film. I mean, anything involving her character, there's this element of silliness to it and absurdism to just how insane these people are treating her presence,
Yeah.
but it is also a very timeless sequence to be seen because I mean, with letterbox culture today and with how interviews are told and late night shows and hot ones and they're eating wings and shit like celebrities are still worshipped to this day. I think to an unhealthy degree and it's only it's only been propelled since La Dolce Vita's release that the image of a celebrity is just become this fixation on the general public.
Yeah, and it's reminiscent of the first scene where Jesus is arriving flying and or leaving flying and nobody's paying attention, but when Anita arrives flying, everybody's crazy, everybody's jumping over each other to find out what they can get out of her. Yeah, it's like she's a deity. Of course, she climbs later in the scene. She climbs, well, not in the scene, but in another scene in this section. She climbs the steps of the St. Peter's Cathedral. It's a very funny scene where she's so excited to see Rome, and she has this energetic personality to her. And all the paparazzi, even them, the guys that are unstoppable, they just can't keep up with her, and then they just start laying down all across the stairs
Yeah.
because they're so tired they can't keep going. But the one person that keeps going is Marcello. And this is like him finding something to pursue. He wants Sylvia. He feels some sort of attraction, and he feels like more of a goal.
Yeah. I think to him it feels like a challenge.
Yeah, like a challenge. His view of Sylvia is very different than his view of Madalena in that earlier scene. Because he like venerates Sylvia, almost when he sees her at the top of the of Peter's Cathedral. While Madalena, she was just like a buddy,
Yeah, or his equal somehow.
and she's also foreign. She's American. She's
Yeah,
Swedish.
she's,
It's
different. She's gorgeous. She's just this icon,
hmm
this like you said, this deity that drops from the sky, an angel that
yeah.
drops from the sky.
I wasn't able to find anything about this, but I've always thought it was so interesting how she's a Swedish American actress going to Italy because, of course, very famously, Ingrid Bergman is a Swedish American actress who went to
Yeah,
Italy to work with Rossellini in a bunch of films, including Journey to Italy, a film that we'll discuss later on
yeah.
another episode. I just thought it was such an interesting coincidence, maybe. I don't know if coincidence is the right word because it may as well have been intentional.
It definitely feels like an homage. Not just Ingrid Bergman, but just foreign actors in general go through this. Well, I would say a lot of actors in general go overseas at some point in their career to either pursue a new audience or a new outlet. Many actors do it all the time. They go to a foreign country and then they become this icon. A good
Yeah.
example is someone like Mads Mikkelsen, who's primarily from Denmark, and then he comes to the States, and acts in a James Bond film, and then from there does Hannibal and all sorts of films and becomes this like icon as this villain character in Hollywood. It happens all the time.
Yeah, and she's also reminiscent of in some sort of way of Greta Garbo, arguably the biggest movie star of all time. Of course, she's not remembered as much these days,
Yeah.
but the phenomenon that she was back in the day, it's insane. Garbo was also Swedish, so I think it plays out towards these real life figures. And well, we were speaking about Rossellini a bit earlier. There's a moment in interview scene, which is my main takeaway of this section. That's the scene that calls to me the most. They ask Sylvia, who has an well, they ask her translator if Italian neorealism was dead or alive. And her translator, as opposed to asking the question, he says, "Just say alive."
Yeah, that was so funny. I was wanting to talk about that scene
Yes.
where they interview her on the couch and
hmm
she just looks she's like you said, she's very different from Madeline, or at least Marcello views her as very different, but she's just as empty of a person because she doesn't even she doesn't even have a personality, I would argue, at all in her character. Everything just feels like a lifelong interview that she has, or there's a lifelong camera in front of her that she has to perform for, and you never get to see the
hmm
true Sylvia in the film.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think I disagree a little bit. Is I think Sylvia represents this person who is kinda still herself, even in these situations where she's being hunted and preyed. She's still true to who she really is. And what I think is ironic of that scene where they ask her if neorealism is dead or alive is that really she's no authority in the field, but they're still so, they just want to ask whatever question, you know, they want to trick her, they want her to stumble over something, to have a story. But whatever she says, it's honestly not gonna be anything valuable, you know? Not really. I mean, it might be something like, who is she to say anything about neorealism? Like, there's a really big chance that she doesn't even know what it is. I mean, she just came here probably to make a film or two or for vacation. And I don't know, I just think it's strange. And what I feel is more inflammatory of this scene is, of course, they say that it's alive. Say that Italian neorealism, this movement that was made for showing what true life was like in Italy, in a post-war Italy. They say it's alive. When a movie like this, it's, and of course the movie is extremely aware of this. A movie like this is not neorealist at all. It's almost a fantasy. And yeah, like a film like Bicycle Thieves, that is as pure an example of Italian neorealism as you can come up with, and that took place 11 years ago in the same city. So you can see how like blatant this lie is of them saying that the people living within this film live in the same situation, and they do that just for marketing reasons and for them to be like, or for even propaganda to be like, Italy's great now. Italy's great. The free market has done amazing things. There's no such thing as bicycle thieving anymore.
Yeah,
Or
there's no D's in Umberto anymore.
yes, there's no miracles in Milan anymore.
I agree. I agree with what you're saying for sure that it is trying to play out like a fantasy for sure, and that it's even the acknowledgement of Italian neorealism as a movement
I know.
posed as a question to one of the characters. It feels like it's satirizing Italy as a whole and the culture
Yeah,
surrounding Italy, their new generations who didn't have to worry about this post World War II that they lived in 11 years ago. To ask a foreigner who had probably has no concept at all of it is just really
of course.
really interesting. Yeah, like you said, it does feel like they're trying to trap her. They're trying to trick her into saying something that is offensive to Italy. Of course, she
Yeah,
doesn't budge because her translator won't even allow that to even happen because maybe he doesn't even trust her with saying the truth. When I said that I viewed her character as sort of empty, I wasn't necessarily saying that she was a shell of a human being. I was more
mhm.
so saying that she wasn't even allowed to be a human being. It doesn't feel
Oh, for
like she's
sure. Then,
being
yeah.
it doesn't feel like she's allowed to be one. So in a sense she feels empty as a person
Yes.
because no one's able to understand how she truly feels about anything. In that sequence of her being interviewed, she's not really being interviewed. It's her PR who's being
Hmm.
interviewed. There's nothing involving her. They're giving her the fun questions that won't pose any problems if she answers no matter what, but anything that's real that involves her character that will be told through the newspaper to millions of people, any of those questions, no, she's not allowed to answer. We're not allowed to know what she feels.
Yeah, and there's some sort of a question of like, what's reality? She goes into this, her real personality and stuff like that. That won't go into the tabloids. The Sylvia that these people know, because of course they had never met her. The one that they know from whatever newspapers they read, you know, the newspaper people makers, whatever they know about Sylvia, it's just as distorted as whatever they're gonna say about Sylvia. But Sylvia in this press conference, she kind of like proves to be very easygoing and clever and confident, commanding of the room, and those are all qualities that Emma lacks. You know, Emma, Marcello's fiance. And so Marcello gets a call from Emma, who worries that Marcello is alone with Sylvia because she's very jealous of him being like cheating on her again. Well, we don't know if it's again because we don't know if the days are in chronological order, but we assume it is again. And him cheating with Madalena was probably not the first time he did that. Yeah, like he gets a call and Marcello is saying like, no, there's 50 people in here, but there is like how this irony to the scene is in that Yvonne Fernand, the actress that plays Emma, was originally offered the role of Sylvia, but her husband turned it down behind her back, which landed her the role of Emma.
That's crazy. That's so crazy. And I think that's really meta to have something like that happen to her.
And yeah, Yvonne didn't know about the fact that she got offered the role of Sylvia initially until after a decade after the film was released.
Wow.
It's fucked up. But I think these traits of her being easygoing and clever and all these stuff that Marcello is, he's being drawn towards it because he can see some sort of realness and truth in her character that he can't see anywhere else. I think a part of these movies about Marcello trying to connect with himself, or like maybe that 10% within Marcello, trying to like find some sort of meaning or identity, clawing to go out and find it. And I think Sylvia presents the very first opportunity for that.
It does feel like that for sure.
Yeah, and later that evening, we see as Marcello is attending a party at the baths of Caracalla, where he dances with Sylvia. And after a few minutes of wild dancing and partying, Sylvia is insulted like by her boyfriend. Her boyfriend Robert is rude to her, and he insults her. So she leaves the baths with Marcello. They wander through the alleys and the streets of Rome together, and they finally end up at the iconic scene in the Trevi Fountain, where they play with the water and they interact flirtatiously. And this is, of course, the most iconic scene in the film. It's those, I don't know, it's one of those scenes that gets really in your mind forever. You know, like Fellini's creating his own worlds. He's that type of filmmaker, like somebody like Tarkovsky or Bergman, where they are creating their own worlds and then they're populating them with their characters. And in this particular scene, a huge factor for that is Nino Rota's masterful score, which like fills the movie with such ironic playfulness, and it makes it feel so relaxing while at the same time being almost mocking of these people and this society.
That the way that sequence plays out, it does feel almost like a dream that Marcello is entering. The introduction of Robert's character at the party where he seems to be the only one who's not drawn to Sylvia, probably because he knows he's already conquered her or something like that, like some sort of twisted, like warped viewpoint he has of her where he thinks he's tamed her or something, that he owns her even. I don't fucking know, but I
Yeah.
can just instantly get the impression that he doesn't care about her, really, and probably viewed her as a challenge, much like Marcello views her. Because even though, yes, Marcello is drawn to her and attracted to her, I don't think he really cares about her
Me neither.
beyond her status or physical features. I don't know. It just shows that every man has the exact same thought behind their head, behind any sort of good impression they're trying to make.
Yeah, they get drawn to this mystery, this aura that she has. And then as soon as they probably become intimate, I mean intimate in an emotional way, or she becomes vulnerable, a guy like Robert or a guy like Marcello will lose interest because this pedestal they put her in is not real. The real humans won't ever get to achieve such heights. We're not gods. Sylvia, as much as the film portrays her as such, she's not a god. She's not a goddess. Those goddesses only exist in the tabloids, in the papers. Those supernatural humans, like we see it today all the time. All these famous people that seem unstoppable, that seem like they are some sort of that they are from a different world and culture and planet than we are. They are just people.
Yeah.
And it's this glorification that is so toxic. Not only does it affect our view of these people, but it affects these people as well, people like Sylvia. After she gets this reputation for being this gorgeous actress that's like a massive star, how is she gonna live up to that every day, every minute of every day? It's impossible. At some point of the day, she's gonna have to take her makeup off. She's gonna have to be a real person, and that's a good thing. But she won't be able to look at it as a good thing because of what other people have portrayed her as. And you can like amplify that argument towards a lot of people in the real world, you know?
I feel like this sequence in particular, this whole
Mhm.
storyline with Sylvia is showing almost like it's romanticizing the art of journalism. And I can totally
Yeah.
see why someone like Roger Ebert would deem this film as his favorite of all time because he probably somehow, I don't know. I actually have not read his review, which is kind of silly of me. I probably should have by now, but
It's good.
it almost feels like maybe he's viewing it as him living vicariously through Marcello's character because he himself was a journalist, a critic in the arts.
Mhm.
And so he's thinking, yeah, this is of the fantasy that every journalist wants to live is just live in the moment, in the party, and be swept up by these stars and glory and party and atmosphere and intrigue and mysticism. And this sequence in particular feels the most like that type of aesthetic that Fellini is trying to possibly
Yes.
satirize. Like it feels like he's satirizing that kind of thing. One could view it as romanticism, but I personally view it as a satirization of that. In that it's just truly ridiculous to live that kind of life and to worship these kinds of people because at the end of the day it doesn't improve anyone's life. It actually is just so damaging to these
Yeah,
people.
to the people involved, yeah. And about that scene that you mentioned, especially the one at the baths where they're all dancing and it's a party. That scene feels so Fellini-esque to me, you know. So it's like this explosive performance. Everybody's dancing. There's people dressed as the devil. There's music blasting. It reminds me of the ending of Eight and a Half and
Yeah.
many other moments in his filmography.
Well, I
I
guess
don't know.
I guess we could call this party like the beginning of the Fellini-esque.
Maybe so. Maybe for later Fellini. Maybe for when he becomes more sophisticated in his craft. But I think there's maybe not exactly the same actions and locations and environments. But for example, Giulietta Massina, especially in Knights of Cabiria, has a very similar vibe to her as that scene has. I think. But yeah,
Hmm.
a quote that Marcello says that, and this is to the other thing you're talking about, referring to Sylvia and her portrayal. Marcello says, "You are everything," he tells her. And he's comparing her to the Virgin Mary. He says, "You are everything, everything. You're the first woman on the first day of creation. You are the mother, sister, lover, friend, angel, devil, earth, home." He seems to be like completely entranced by Sylvia, chasing her around, similarly to how the kids chase the image of the Virgin Mary around later in the film. And
Yeah.
then Sylvia baptizes him with the water of the Trevi fountain, like playfully. And it feels like it could be a moving experience that might even change his life. But he's so set in his own ways that it doesn't amount to anything more than a slap in the face the next morning. And then we never get to hear of or see Sylvia ever again in the film.
No, it's just a moment that passes by. I
Yeah.
I do want to touch on this little moment that I found really humorous is
Hmm.
after they leave the baths and Marcello is just like itching, just fiending to find a place for them to stay the night. Like he's calling up he calls up Maddalena even to see if they have a room which is she replies and says that her father's like business partners are over at the house, so no, that's a no-go. And he debates calling a hotel or motel or anything like that, but I think that's just, I mean, it's kind of gross to see that he's
Hmm.
instantly thinking of a bed to share with her for the night. Meanwhile, what I think is funny is Sylvia is busy worrying about this little kitten on the street that she finds and wanting Marcello to find a saucer of milk for it. And then that becomes his main priority. His task is to get her approval by doing that. He thinks, oh, if I can get the cat some milk, I can get some pussy or something. I don't know. It's so fucked up. It's so fucked up, but it's also just
Nice
funny.
pun.
Yeah, I didn't mean for that to happen. Unintentional pun there. But I think it's funny that that is what Sylvia's priorities are for the night. I don't know. Like you said, she really does command the room any room she's in. And so
Yes.
everyone just kind of abides by her and does her bidding. But she doesn't, it's not like she begs for it. She just suggests something and it becomes the equivalent of life or death for some people.
And
And even Marcello is brought under this spell of hers that she's just unintentionally bestowing on him and many other men is just this feeling to be seen by her and to be acknowledged,
mhm.
like the girl from Ipani, you know that song when
Yeah,
you
the girl from Ipanema. Yeah.
yeah, Ipanema, that which is basically a song about a woman like Sylvia who every man is drawn to and they want her attention, but she doesn't even acknowledge their that kind of, I don't know, attraction, really. I don't know. Or she's numbed by it. Maybe that's more like it. She's numbed by it.
The next morning, after this whole Sylvia action happens, we get the last scene with Sylvia. Marcello and Sylvia arrive at Sylvia's hotel, and they're both physically attacked by an enraged Robert. I think he slaps Sylvia around, he makes her go back into the hotel. She enters the hotel, and we never see her again, even though she's arguably the most iconic character in the movie. Then he punches Marcello, and all the paparazzis are taking pictures, being extra annoying in this scene because they're not only disturbing the intimacy of the action and the characters we see in the film, like their fight, but they're disturbing the intimacy of the scene itself. It doesn't feel like a scene that has this huge payoff, or it doesn't feel like the action is as huge as it actually is. Like him just getting beat in the sidewalk by this crazy American. It's like the paparazzis don't let the scene play out. Like they're not only not letting the fight play out, they're not letting the scene play out, which adds so much more to the mystique of the environment. I think so much more of the jungle-like qualities that Marcello was talking about in the one of the earliest scenes.
Yeah. I agree what you mean in the sense that the paparazzis act as this sort of like a nuisance that evokes a different meaning in the scene. Like you said, if they weren't there, if their existence wasn't there, and they didn't wake up Robert sleeping in his car, then the fight wouldn't have happened. He would have just walked her
Mm-hmm.
to the hotel, and no confrontation would have occurred because he would have just been sleeping in his car, which I assume he was sleeping there overnight waiting for her to return, eventually going to confront her and slap her, regardless.
Yep.
And maybe in a sense he was going to anyways when he would eventually wake up, but because of the paparazzi showing up and interfering with the flow of the scene, yeah, they in a sense create the
Yeah,
drama they were trying to photograph.
that's interesting. I wonder if he saved her from more violence. Maybe by him turning that rage and that toxicity toward Marcelo as opposed to. I mean, he does strike Sylvia, but maybe if he hadn't seen Marcello and she had just come home late, maybe she would have suffered more violence on to his hands.
Yeah. I also think there's that level of him kind of holding back because of the paparazzi's existence, because if they weren't there, I think he would have been a lot more harsh and violent towards the both of them, but because the paparazzis were there photographing him doing that, I think he probably felt he had to be reserved for that. It does worry me about what their relationship is going to end up being beyond this
Mhm.
scene. I don't think it's going to work out, to be honest.
Not at all.
I mean, I can only hope that it won't work out and that Sylvia will eventually leave him or something will happen where they'll acknowledge their toxicity. But I don't know, seeing as how Emma and Marcello operate, maybe love is just non-existent in this kind of world that Fellini is building.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it. I can see the argument of him holding back, but I can also think that regardless of the paparazzi, this guy is not holding back. He doesn't care about his reputation. He's not a famous person. He's just a random guy.
Apologies for interrupting that, but the next scene is the introduction of Steiner, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. And
Yeah.
again, it's not really chronological. It's a completely different day, separate event, and it's Marcello. kind of sitting back, leaning in a chair while his paparazzi's taking a photo of a woman and a horse, and they're both standing on tables, and it just looks ridiculous, and it looks like a photo shoot that he has absolutely no interest in whatsoever, as he does with basically 90% of his job, it seems. If there's not a woman like Sylvia out there who is just breaking the norms that he's used to, he'll just treat this as something he has to get through, like a shot he has to take at the doctors that he's begrudgingly moving past. But he glances over and sees a man walk into a church, and later on, when he follows the man into the church who is playing on the organ, playing a jazz tune on organ, it's revealed that it's a friend of his named Steiner. We don't get to know much else about him in the scene other than it's someone that Marcello clearly has respect and admiration for. I don't know. What do you think about that scene?
Yeah, what strikes me the most of Steiner's introduction is that scene where he asks the priest if he can play the organ, and so he starts playing jazz. And then the priest is like, "Don't play jazz. Play the music. Like this is no place for jazz. Play something more refined or whatever." So he starts playing Toccata and Fugue by Bach. And what I think is so interesting about this scene is that we see the struggle of Steiner's character, who is another recurring character we'll get to throughout the film. Well, I mean, if it wasn't clear already, this is a full spoiler review of the entire thing. Good thing to say 2 hours into it, but here we see like that struggle of Steiner's character. Like he wants to play the chaotic, exotic jazz, but he's not being permitted to by the church's priest. So he has to play the music he doesn't want to, even though he's good at it. And this scene works as a sort of microcosm for his entire arc. His arc being not about learning to enjoy to play back, but more about how he'd rather not play the organ at all if he can't play jazz. I think that's kind of what
Yeah.
encapsulates Steiner's character, and we'll see more from him later.
Yeah. That was a really good little scene to introduce his character and also to show
Yeah,
that there is someone out there that Marcello admires and respects beyond the usual lust he has for women. That there is a
yeah.
man out there whose career and personality he looks up to. I It's interesting the point you made about Steiner thinking that he's, I don't know, he can't play the jazz that he wants to. He has to play some other song even though he's good at it. You said that's a microcosm for his arc. It kind of is a great way to describe Marcello as well, because he sometimes feels like he has to be a journalist. He's good at it, but he almost acts begrudgingly about it and kind of bored with it, because he's not able to do what he really loves, but he doesn't even know what he loves. There's that tension and that kind of constriction with his life that he probably sees in Steiner, but he thinks Steiner is handling it multitudes better than he could.
An aspect of Marcello's character we haven't discussed really is that he kind of wants to be a writer. I think that's brought up in this scene. But yeah, it is. It definitely is when he's talking with Steiner in the church. It's like, yeah, Marcello wants to be a writer, but yeah, he doesn't pursue that because he's kind of comfortable living his playboy life, living with heiresses and spending the night playing with kittens and famous actresses at the Trevi Fountain. But he really is not getting any meaning from that. He's not getting anything from that, and so he needs to somewhat stop his lust. He needs to control his lust in order to take something that fulfills him. And that's something that he's really not willing to do. He's not willing to stop lusting after these things, not even for happiness. It's even he either he can't or he's not willing to, but he won't do it.
Yeah. It's like you said earlier, it's almost like he's having to view the consequences of what kind of life he's living, um,
Yeah.
down the road, which of course will come into play a lot as this film progresses.
Yeah.
I don't really have a lot to say about this scene in particular other than what we've been through with Steiner's introduction. It's just a simple introduction to this man.
It's an effective scene, but it's very small,
Yeah.
which contrasts to our next scene,
Oh
which
boy.
is arguably the largest sequence in the movie. I'm pretty sure it's the same day, but later that afternoon, or on another afternoon, Marcello, Paparazzo, and Emma drive to the outskirts of Rome to cover the story of two children who claim to have found the Virgin Mary. The event attracts an enormous crowd of people, of course. It's been broadcast through TV and radio and all these things. The children start running all over the place as it starts to rain and the crowd follows them. After the chaos from all these like almost riot, it is revealed that a sick child was trampled by the melee in the melee. This is one of the most dense scenes in the film, one of the most tragic ones. We have a lot of characters playing in this scene. It's the family of the kids, it's the kids themselves, it's the crowd. We have Marcello, we have Emma, we have Paparazzo, and it's just it's almost at the heart of the film. It's not exactly halfway through, but almost.
I think it's I think it's kind of ironic that out of all the I'm using quotations right now, out of all the news coverage that Marcello does, the one involving religion is the one he brings Emma with, probably because he thinks it's the most tame and less it's the event that he'll less likely cheat on her with. So at least that's how I view him inviting her, which is just so depressing to think about that he's only bringing her with probably because he's not going to cheat on her, and maybe he finds religion boring, and so he'd want her to be with just in case.
In this scene, this like we said, it's a very strong scene. And the biggest takeaway for me is that like we see it like people are more concerned in seeming holy than they are in following the rules of their own church. They do not extend love to one another or compassion. They leave the sick people on the floor in the rain because they think they might be able to get a miracle out of it. They trample each other without care because they want to take a glimpse of the Madonna or be special. They fight over
Yeah.
the leaves and branches because they think there is something holy in the tree, but when being tested if they can be humble and respectful, they all fail. There's even a possibility that the kids or the kids' parents like made it all up for the attention and the whatever money they can gain from these. Since we see as they are all posing for the newspapers and doing all this crap, and this type of behavior has been visible all throughout history. Like an example of this is in today's world is how some people would do things such as posting pictures on Facebook or Instagram with tons of crucifixes thanking the Lord and citing him as an inspiration and whatnot, and then turn around and be envious, greedy, and violent without any remorse. It's this
Yeah.
religious hypocrisy that we see.
It is very hypocritical for sure in
Yeah.
this sequence. And of course in modern day. An example I was thinking of was when Kanye released Jesus is King and had those exclusive gospel chants that they would do in the
So funny.
fields on like a hill, but he had it seem like anyone was welcome to it as if he was starting his own little gospel church, but in actuality it was like this exclusive invite only club of just a bunch of rich people coming together and pretending to preach the words of God when really they just are there for the exclusivity of it. And of course, Kanye still continued releasing his Yeezy products and being a belligerent asshole, and it's just so fucking like the sequence of them all coming together in this circle for supposedly for God and for receiving this holy event is just so hypocritical because they only think of themselves and what they can gain from this experience, not
Exactly.
about
Yes.
not about the experience itself. And I do agree with you that with the hypocrisy that I think the family is definitely using it to their advantage financially because if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken, in the scene they say wherever if the Virgin Mary is spotted or wherever the children point is where they will build a church. So in a sense, they'll get the funding for it. I'm not sure if it was revealed if they would get people to build it or if they would get the funding to build it themselves. And if that was the case, then they're easily just trying to target the money of these people who are just ignorant to this kind of ploy. And I don't know. It almost seems like Marcello is basking in the absurdity of it. I don't think he believes that the Virgin Mary is coming at all. I don't think he himself is religious at all as a person. And
I
so,
think he is. I think he definitely identifies himself with one religion, but I don't think he would practice any religion. He might not
yeah,
be though. There might be a scene
that's
with
what I
Steiner
meant.
where he outright says he's atheistic, and that's that.
Yeah, I definitely don't think he's practicing at all in the film. It's
And
also interesting the sequence where they're all praying for something to come true,
mhm,
and Emma instinctively prays for Marcello to be the only one in
for her to be the only woman in Marcello's life.
yeah, so sad.
Yeah,
I hate it.
it is, but it's Emma prays for Marcello to stop lusting for women, yet her prayers are like not answered at all, which could represent how her real prayers might be getting lost in a sea of bad faith prayers, or as like a form of proof that the Virgin Mary was never there in the first place. Which brings me to another point I wanted to bring up, which is to ask you, like, really, do you think that in that scene, that the Virgin Mary actually made an appearance, or that it's the kids' claim, or that the kids' claim was made in good faith? Like the kids actually believe that they saw the Virgin Mary?
You could argue. I know
Mm-hmm.
I made the point that the kids could be doing this as a ploy to get funding for the family or for the
Yeah.
church to be built there, but you could argue because of the way Fellini treated the opening scene of the statue of Jesus leaving, you could argue
Mm-hmm.
that this crowd of people coming in
Believers.
bad faith, coming in poor faith and in
Mm-hmm.
selfishness, they drove the Virgin Mary away from the site. You could argue that maybe they did see her, but they attracted the wrong crowd, and in a sense, the Virgin Mary had to leave because she knew that, no one believed. There were no true believers there.
That's an interesting idea. I like that. Yeah, I like that. And there's also this whole aspect of how the Virgin Mary is kind of, again, being portrayed similarly as Sylvia, you know?
Yeah.
Everybody's going crazy looking for her. There's journalists everywhere, there's TV, there's radio. Everyone's going crazy. Like in this time it's not the paparazzi, it's just regular people. And then the ending, of course. It's
Oh, that's that's so bad.
the ending where a kid gets trampled to death, or at least, well, he dies. I think, well, I assume he got trampled to death, but
Yeah.
maybe he died of his own sickness because he was a sick child that they put there in the mud and the rain. And it's a crazy night followed by a dawn of consequences. We see as Marcello is in the funeral with Emma, and they're burying the kid. I mean, it's tragic. It's Fellini making like the consequences of this hypocrisy of these people, you know? These bad faith agents, this need for everything to be huge and on TV and on the radio, and for everything to be recorded and detailed, and maybe now it's a heiress, the next day it's an actress, the next day it's a queen, the next day it's the Virgin Mary. So he's kind of showcasing the destructive power of the way these characters and people are depicted by the
Yeah.
media.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and then after that, after this whole traumatic event, we have one evening, perhaps the night after the previous event, maybe it's the same day. Marcello and Emma both attend a small gathering at Steiner's house, where they are both
Um,
confronted with these ideas of settling down, this new life, this new door opens for them. And in that meeting, Marcello also meets Iris, who is a woman he admires.
this scene basically plays out all much similarly to Steiner's introduction in the sense that we see Marcello just continue to admire him and his life, his but this time it's his family. It's expanded to his wife, his children, because everything to him just seems perfect. It seems like Steiner is living the ideal life, the life that Marcello is realizing he wants to achieve. Not
Mhm.
necessarily with Emma. Of course, Emma herself hopes to achieve this life with Marcello, but Marcello just wants to achieve this life by himself. He doesn't really think about Emma as the one to achieve it with. And not only like the family dynamic, but also the idea that Steiner still has his independence as as a man, and he's still able to function to his own accord and have his own life outside of it. Isn't Steiner a writer?
I think he is, yes. I mean, he has a lot of famous writer friends. I don't know if he himself is a writer. I would assume so, though. This scene also has this eerie quality to it, you know? Steiner plays these sounds of nature that he recorded, and they do sound beautiful, but there is an irony of listening to nature in a recording, amplifying that feeling of detachment that someone who, quote unquote, retired from an exciting life to settle down may feel. Like a quote by Steiner on the disappointments he's felt after settling down is, "Don't be like me. Salvation doesn't lie within four walls. I'm too serious to be a dilettante or dilettante, and too much of a dabbler to be a professional. Even the most miserable life is better than a sheltered existence in an organized society where everything is calculated and perfected." I think this line specifically has a huge impact on Marcello's life, especially when it comes to the ending of the movie, where we see how Marcello has kind of forsaken everything from his ambitions to his passions to everything else in between. And he was thinking, maybe I'll settle down, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. But a man he admired having such a negative viewpoint of this is like he's closing the door. You know, he's like, maybe a life is not that good.
Yeah. This scene does play out like he's met with a crossroads of yeah, whether to adhere to Steiner's advice or to push on and still pursue it.
Yeah, he gets these questions brought up to him, and he really can't stand them. He's not able to. Marcello is not really able or capable of engaging with these questions.
No, he's very conflicted.
Yeah, and we often see characters with absurdly busy lives in media. You know, like in sitcoms and stuff like that, where something huge happens. But this is an example where the sheer amount of activity takes a huge toll on the main character, making all these exchanges such a common occurrence in Marcello's life that they're no longer anything special. Not any of the last nights, as interesting as they are to discuss and as detailed as they are, none of them really stand out from one another, you know? As much as, I mean, they do in a scene analysis way, in a cinematic sense, but not for Marcello's life, you know? He must have been
Yeah.
traumatized, but he never brings anything that happened again. You know, he doesn't bring up his adventure with Madalena. He doesn't bring up Sylvia. He doesn't bring up the thing with the Madonna. None of those things are ever brought up again. He except for his relationship with Steiner. And here he's seeing like this other option. You know, he sees the other life. It's settling down. It might cause him to be as depressed and directionless as Steiner. And when he discusses it with Steiner, it's like, oh well, but then Emma brings it up and he grows upset at her. And I think that's where he's done talking about it, at least for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really important sequence. It makes the introduction of Steiner, that whole scene a lot more impactful because we finally get to see what his life is like outside
Yeah.
of this one little moment. We get this little glimpse of him, but like you said, he almost feels like he's being trapped and not able to be free um,
Mm-hmm.
with any of his interests or passions, and it's almost like he's telling Marcello, he's giving him a warning, like it's like an omen to not
Yeah.
follow in his footsteps. Even though, and so
Yeah.
Marcello has to just completely rewire his brain to think differently and to agree with him. He's kind of like a sheep towards Steiner. He'll listen to anything he says and agree with it. Now he has to agree to disagree with him.
Yeah. He's the only person who Marcello listens to and
Yeah.
whose lessons stay with him throughout the entire film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Steiner is truly unhappy. He has the perfect life, right? He has the perfect wife, the perfect kids. He's rich, living in these amazing house or penthouse or whatever, he also has all these important people around him, all these people from all over the world, artists, intellectuals, cultural icons, and yet he's still deeply unhappy. He's
Hmm.
it's like what we mentioned earlier. It doesn't matter how good he is at playing back. All he wants to do is play jazz and be free and do these extroverted activities, and that's all he's gonna care about. And so he feels so trapped, and it's kind of like, in a sense, his life is the opposite of Marcello's life at the end, by the end. So, because Marcello becomes truly boundless.
Yeah.
He seems to have no wife, no family. His relationship with Emma seems to have been over for a while.
Well, that's
Of
a lot
course,
later in the film. We haven't gotten to quite yet.
I know, but I was just gonna mention how it contrasts with Steiner's life here,
Yes,
and how it seems like both options for a person like Marcello are gonna end in tragedy.
that's true.
And I think seeing Steiner's life, see him being so unhappy, and then seeing how his life turns out at the end of the film is the major push for Marcello to go and do the things he does at the end of the film. But yeah, and after this scene, we get kind of an odd scene. It's what most people would refer to as the intermission. So it seems like this encounter with Steiner has motivated Marcello into writing his novel again. So he's writing his novel by a seaside restaurant, and he meets a young girl named Paola,
Yeah.
and he compares her to an angel.
Yeah, this was a really weird scene.
I know. I think it's a vital scene because of how he comes up again in the epilogue. For example, Paola plays a song called Patricia. It's a song by Perez Prado, which it'll come back later. But here, Fellini is using the song Patricia to represent beauty and art and real down to earth people. Whereas later, I mean, that's something we'll discuss when we get to it. But
Yeah.
he changes its meaning. And another thing is that the fact that Paola only appears in this scene where Marcello is writing his literature, one of his more pure and whimsical desires, is not really a coincidence, right? She represents the type of pleasure and achievements that are capable of filling his heart. She scarcely appears in the movie, since at this point in Marcello's life, this type of true purity is hard to find, yet she's still here. And
Yeah.
they haven't said goodbye yet. He hasn't truly abandoned purity. He hasn't truly abandoned his angel. And she's doing the right thing. You could argue that she's here as a sign that this is his path, writing his novels, becoming an author and a writer, instead of a lusty person that searches all over for the newest gossips and the newest blah blah blah. This is his destiny. This is what he was made for, and this is what he's good for.
I could see that. That's a much better way to interpret it. I just thought he was being a creep flirting with like a 13-year-old girl.
Yeah, that's true. That's also an aspect to it, not for sure.
Like
Um,
as if he still is living in his lusty persona, but yeah, I agree that
he,
he kind of is trying to, I don't know, trying to view his writing process through a lens of this is his passion, this is what he's meant to do, rather than the journalism and the gossiping and the senseless drama that he has to kind of create with these cultural icons and these actors and fancy people, fancy folks. He'd much rather just be at a table listening to some music and write down his
yeah,
thoughts on pen and paper.
and it's one of those things that reminds you of like how hard it is to build a habit,
Yes.
to just sit down and do this thing every day. Like it's gonna be hard as hell for Marcello to write his novel, which is
Yeah.
one of the reasons why he keeps going back to this life. He's gonna get money, he's gonna get benefits, he's gonna get these things, but he's not gonna get happiness through it. He's
No.
not gonna get fulfillment. He's not gonna be like, yeah, a better person for it. I mean, it's something to do in the meantime
Yeah.
while he procrastinates writing his novel. And that's kind of something we can all relate to. And this is why I think this dynamic between Marcello and Fellini is so Marcello. This time I mean Marcello Mastroianni is so perfect because you have Fellini judging Marcello for all his decisions, for what he's, and he's putting him in this hellish world. He's doing all these bad things. But then Mastroianni comes in and he portrays him as, even though he's an asshole, he's still a sympathetic character who honestly wants the best for his own life. Yeah, maybe he's extremely superficial and he's doing all these toxic things and portraying all these horrible behaviors, but he's just a guy. He's just a guy that wants to succeed and do something from his life and has found himself in this stuck position where he can't really get out. And I think Mastroianni is very great. Is great at portraying that.
That's a good way to describe it, Eugene, for sure. And that
Thank you.
I just realized also that this is the only scene in the entire film where he is actually working on his writing.
It
Um,
is, yes.
as if like you said, the time management or just the idea that he's not getting paid for it, so he might as well just stick to something he is getting paid for in the meantime. That is super telling with how we are in today's life. A movie
Yeah.
that came out last year that I absolutely loved is Perfect Days by Wim Wenders, and that film is all about, not to segue completely, I'll bring it back to La Dolce Vita, but both films explore that sort of theme where I feel like people need to have a purpose in order to be
Mm-hmm.
fulfilled or be happy, but that's not necessarily the case. They can still try to find it through other means, through other activities and other forms of companionship and life. While Perfect Days showcases a man who is kind of in the at the bottom of the totem pole because he's a toilet cleaner,
Mm-hmm.
at least like how it's viewed in the States, if someone were to tell their family that they clean toilets for a living, they would be judged instantly, frowned upon, everything. But this man, even though he lives a life that one would deem to be unfulfilling, he has so much fulfillment in his life, and he's fully enriched and engrossed in his activities, in his passions that he's able to discover, and he's truly happy with his life and where it's headed. But
Mm-hmm.
Marcello, he has a career that people would view as successful. They would view him as a man who has achieved it, who has achieved a well-paying job. He has a fiance that clearly loves him. He has a house and a beautiful car, and he's surrounded by all these people, and there's constant life around him, and he's still able to pursue his writing in the meantime. Like, on
Yeah.
paper, he should be happy, he should feel fulfilled. At least that's how we're supposed to
Mm-hmm.
view it. That's how we're taught and how we're raised to view it. But of course, while we see him in this movie, he has no fulfillment, he has no joy, he has nothing. He's trying to hold on to writing because maybe that is the 1 ounce of joy he can find in life. At least that's what he thinks. He thinks, okay, maybe this will make me happy. Maybe this
Mm-hmm.
will make me feel better about myself. Because Steiner, he in the previous scene we talked about, he was thinking, if I settle down, maybe I'll be happy like Steiner. Maybe I'll be fulfilled like Steiner. And then he hears from Steiner, from his own lips, that he is not happy and to avoid this life at all cost. So now he's trying to rewire himself, at least if we're viewing this movie chronologically through this next scene of him writing. Maybe this is his natural step in this direction of trying to figure out what he wants to do with himself. And so to compare this movie with Perfect Days, it's okay if you don't know what you want to do with your life, because whatever you choose to do with it, that's not something you should use for your primary goal to be happy and fulfilled. There's something a lot more to it, and it's something that I think that's what's beautiful about life, is to explore all the different ideas. You don't have to stick to one entire goal for your life. And Marcello is attempting to do so in this scene. And I like the wholesome aspect you thought up of. I thought of him as Drake being creepy with this little girl. Meanwhile, you were like, he's calling her an angel because she's so pure and he wants to live the pure life. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's that's my headcanon from now on. I'll view that scene as that because I'd rather Marcello be a a sentimental guy like that.
I think all of what you said also applies to Steiner. And I mean, we see Marcello as this guy that has a great life. He literally gets to get things that are desired by a lot of people. Like he has all the money in the world, and he has a job that makes her meet people and network and do all these things, but he's utterly unfulfilled. And it's a reflection not only of how we see Marcello's character, but also how we see celebrities in the real world, how they have everything we want, when in reality we probably don't even want those lives. They probably live miserable lives. And it's the same thing that we are the audience that see Marcello this way. We're the audience in real life who see celebrities this way, but in the movie Marcello is the audience of Steiner, who sees his life as perfect, but in reality it's an amazing disappointment. It's trying to break down how we shouldn't idolize these figures, because they're not worth idolizing. It asks these questions of religious figures as well. Not only is Fellini saying celebrities are the new gods, he's also saying, are gods the old celebrities? Which I think is a
Yeah.
really interesting question to pose. The following
Oh,
evening,
I love this scene so much.
the following evening shown to us. So Marcello meets with his father for dinner on the Via Veneto. Later, they go to the Cha-Cha Club, where they come across Fanny, Marcello's ex. I think she's French as well. They dine together, and Fanny appears to be charmed by Marcello's father. So she invites him to her home. Marcello, who had been invited to the same neighborhood by another dancer, arrives to find Fanny in despair.
I
Mm,
really love this scene because we get to see sort of how Marcello came to be through his
mhm.
father and how he kind of is the extension of him. Because we learn from Marcello, who says it to, I think, a paparazzo or someone else, that his father wasn't really involved in his life, and he was actually surprised to see him actually seek him out in the Via Veneto, and he's just sitting there at the chair waiting for him. A paparazzo approaches Marcello as he drives by and says, a man who says he's your father is looking for you." And Marcello's like, "What? My dad?" And he's actually stunned by this rare appearance from his father. He At first he's really happy, he's really excited, and so are we as the audience to be introduced to this guy, see where Marcello came from, what kind of environment he might have grown up in, and just to see if his father was the original blueprint to his lifestyle, and to see what he originally idolized to be. Because, a lot of sons suffer the sins of their fathers
Yes.
throughout history, and the poison does in fact sometimes drip through, as a young Kendall Roy once said. And we get to see that through Marcello, that his dad is just like him. He's a regular old horn dog. He is just as lustful, even though he lived he's still married to Marcello's mother, and they've assumedly been married for, probably 40 years or more.
At least.
You just see how little she matters to him when he comes to the eye contact of any woman. Not necessarily just Fanny, but any woman. Even at the beginning when they were sitting at the table, a woman walks by and says hi to Marcello, and she's like, is that a famous actress or something?" Um, he he's just as blinded by lust as Marcello is. And maybe this kind of stains Marcello's image of his father, because again, we he never got to see much of him growing up, but seeing how his father essentially is like a mirror to Marcello's existence maybe puts his life um into a sour viewpoint. I don't know, kind of sours his life because
I
oh, sorry, you go. What do you think?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think you're right, but I think Marcello lacks the self-awareness to see that. I think he's a child still in his father's eyes. So that's why when his father leaves, Marcello just runs after him trying to get like his final goodbye in the taxi. He's like, "Oh, I'll drive you, Dad." He's still desperate for his approval
Yeah.
and his attention. In a similar way that Emma's relationship with Marcello is, and his father just can't give it to him, and
Yeah.
it's really sad, and it's yeah, you can tell that this is where Marcello came from, and this scene, I think this scene is particularly poignant because it emphasizes a lot of Marcello's past. This scene, at the scene at the Cha Cha Club, is one of the most Fellini-esque scenes in the movie. And I know I'm using Fellini-esque a lot, but that's like a literal term that's in the dictionary. And like Fellini's characters tend to be lustful, irresponsible, immature, juvenile, and very uncertain of their place in the world. Very like that's kind of how you would describe a teenager almost. And to me, this scene more than any other in the movie proves how Marcello is the ultimate Fellini protagonist. He's his own devil and he cannot escape himself or his past, and how they affect him in the present, which leads to this awkward dinner scene where he's constantly being undermined by others. Like, here's where I could feel like his journey was doomed. Because he puts on display his main flaws, right? He can't grow from his past, he cannot connect with others, and he doesn't care if he's failed them. Like in this case, he failed to give Fanny the article he had promised her, and which might be some of the reasons why he would make for a good journalist, but that won't lead him towards a fulfilling life that we were talking about, and it's ultimately what causes his moral demise. We can
Yeah.
even see the effects of that later, and how presenting himself in this way affects his relationship with his father. Yeah, like Fellini is still showing us, and especially Marcello, they're still showing us compassion towards Marcello's character in this scene, making us feel the reject from his father. And to those aspects, just add the spectacle and the magic tricks and the dances, and you get a scene that for me says like only Fellini.
Yeah.
It's Marcello is a very complicated character. He's a very complex depiction of somebody who's struggling existentially in his life. And in this scene, you can see how his father being kind of like how Marcello is, and treating Marcello's mom the same way he treats Emma has led to him being this person.
You can't help but feel the disappointment in Marcello's character when he sees how his father
Yeah.
acts. Maybe there was that sense of hope when he first meets him, thinking that they can rekindle their or not even rekindle, but kindle a relationship between them, and that there will be some sort of final goodbye or some sort of approval, like you said, that he'd been always trying to find throughout his whole life. But again, that's not something that'll ever happen because that's not who his father is. That's not the kind of man he is.
And it works both ways. Not only is Marcello disappointed of his father, but his father is also very disappointed in Marcello. And his rejection is something that really hurts while watching the movie.
Yeah.
And of course later, so that sequence ends with Marcello arriving to find Fanny in despair, right? In this neighborhood. And she's yelling at Marcello like, "Come, come." And Marcello's father seems to have had a medical emergency. It looks like he had a heart attack, but maybe it's something else. And Marcello insists his father stays with him for the night, but he refuses and takes a taxi to the train station instead. Not even accepting that Marcello drives him to the train station or that he drives him home. He just leaves,
Yeah.
leaving Marcello dry.
Yet another consequence of the dawn of
Yeah,
the night's antics. And
yeah,
this time the consequence is that age catches up with Marcello's father, and in turn will eventually catch up to Marcello.
yeah. And in this scene we can also see how even though Marcello is part of this dream life, for many he has become some sort of a disappointment. Yeah, and his father, who at the same time, even though he might be lustful like Marcello, he doesn't seem to be he doesn't seem to live a very luxurious life.
No.
I also feel the sense that like Marcello was kind of pressuring his father to like do this with Fanny. He was like, "Oh, please, Dad, you be awesome. You can get her in your bed. Come on." And
Yeah.
And yeah, you can feel like the disappointment of Marcello's father. Like he doesn't want to be a part of Marcello's life anymore, or to learn about him, or to spend time with him. He finds his lifestyle overwhelming, but
Well,
it seems like
I do think that he is using him for entertainment purposes. Like I think he wanted
Mhm.
some sort of fun to be had, and maybe he did want to cheat on his wife for like the billionth time. But I truly think it's just a matter of age catching up to him, and he eventually feels overwhelmed. His body feels overwhelmed by these sensations and stimuli that maybe
Mhm.
he maybe once Marcello moved out of the house, he kind of gave up on that and started living a life of a devoted husband to his mother and stayed at home and started watching TV shows and sitting at home all day. And this is him, Marcello's father I'm talking about. This is him trying to
Mhm.
rekindle that kind of stimuli and excitement from his life that he sees in Marcello and how he's living. And Marcello, of course, is numbed to it as his father probably once was way back when. But of course, yeah, like you said, he's getting overwhelmed and probably has a heart attack or some sort of medical emergency. It looks like he's just completely, he almost looks like it's heat exhaustion just from the overexcitements of the night.
I agree with your interpretation to a certain extent. I think I did see the scene a little bit differently. To me, it felt more like Marcello's father was just like this guy that happened to be in the city, and he was like, "Oh, my son's here, so maybe I'll go see him." And then Marcello's life was so exhausting and unpleasant, but he was kind of still willing to go along with him until like it was just too much for him and his body and everything. And so it kind of reveals the treacherous nature of this lifestyle, how
Hmm.
it's the physical toll it takes, and how really, from the outside perspective, from somebody who's more experienced and smarter, wouldn't see that life as compelling at all.
Yeah. Um, I do think though that Marcello's father did live that kind of lifestyle of having
Hmm.
affairs and flings and partying, but he's experiencing he's experiencing that life from a new generation, from the Fellini generation that he's trying to
Mm.
interpret. Something he's not at all caught up with. It's like an old man learning new tricks. It's it's overwhelming and almost near impossible. Um, what he experienced was what the La Dolce Vita he experienced was during Italian neorealism. You know,
Yeah,
he wasn't.
in the
He was
pre-war
like
era.
pre-war, literally pre-war was what he was experiencing. He was not experiencing the amount of freedom that Marcello is able to take for granted. That
Hmm.
and Marcello's father is just so admired and intrigued by it, and he's trying to live it again, but he's realizing it's so overwhelming. It's to a level of excess that he's and stimuli that he's not used to, his body's not used to, and it's falling apart
Yeah.
at every minute he's involved in it. And so I agree he has to escape, but I think it's more a matter, it's not necessarily that he's disappointed with Marcello or he's rejecting Marcello's um
Hmm.
lifestyle. It's that he's not he can't adapt to it. He just can't do it
Yeah.
anymore. He thought he could.
Mm.
He thought he could relive his life and relight the candle of his lust and his insanity that he had at his age. But it's just gotten way
Interesting.
too intense. It's like someone who grew up playing an Atari and they pull out an Xbox Series X. You know, it's completely
Yeah.
different. It's so much more overwhelming. There's so many more pixels and you just gotta leave it. Gotta leave it or you're gonna get
Yeah.
a heart attack or a brain aneurysm. So,
Yeah.
yeah, really cool
I mean,
scene
yeah.
though. I really love it. I really love getting to see another side
More
of
of Marcello's
Marcello's.
origins.
Yeah, exactly. Another side of Marcello and his family dynamic. Sadly, we don't get to see anything involving his mother, but you know, maybe that could be kind of an a comparison to the Virgin Mary where she's nowhere in sight.
Hmm.
A motherly figure to him. That tender love is nowhere in sight in Marcello's life.
Yeah, I can see that. I like that interpretation.
I like your interpretation as well. I don't think we've said anything that's downright inaccurate. Like Marcello secretly wants to be a part of this Decepticons, but the Autobots are just pressuring him to live a life of good.
Yeah, I think Fellini with this scene is trying to say how truly admirable Marcello is as a character.
Yeah. How
um,
he's living La Dolce
yeah, that's why it's called La Dolce Vita because
La,
everything in
La,
this movie is sweet.
La Stinky Vita.
Yeah, La Stinky Vita. And speaking of, the next night, Marcello goes to a castle outside of Rome. This, by the way, was filmed in the actual castle, I'm pretty sure. He arrives late to an aristocrat's party when everyone was drunk and their energy had been drained. Marcello yet again stumbles upon Maddalena. Maddalena sits Marcello in a vast room and then closes herself in another room connected by an echo chamber or something of the sort. Without seeing each other, Marcello and Maddalena flirt with each other, and I think Marcello proposes marriage to her. However, Maddalena, she gets distracted when another man begins to kiss her. So Marcello goes to another room where some of the guests seem to be playing like a Ouija style game, and there he meets Jane, a British heiress whom she spends the night with. It's like this to me is like the main depiction of how bitter the sweet life really is. Everyone's drunk, everyone's lying around, nobody's having fun, everybody's
Yeah.
just tired. They're there more for duty than for pleasure. He has this scene with Madalena where he's like actually trying for one to be expressive, trying to express his feelings and trying to put himself out there in some sort of way, trying to risk something. And maybe his father's encounter, even though it might have happened months before this, like narratively, it's what this is where Marcello is maybe trying to make it a change, but the way that that's received is by him getting ignored when Madalena starts kissing another man. And of course, you could argue that maybe he's just being a romantic and he's just being like this guy. But yeah, we're talking about the sweet life. We're joking about it, but I think this is when the film starts crashing down on its
Yeah.
depiction of how sweet this life can be. You know.
Yeah. I mean, this is the most obvious downward spiral, but also just everything that's following the scene with Paola is the downward spiral, I believe. Like
Yeah.
like the sequence with as soon as his father leaves after almost having a heart attack, that's where the downward spiral starts. But I agree, the aristocrat party where everyone is just bored with themselves and they're trying to entertain themselves through alternative methods goes to show the ridiculousness of their situation and their lifestyle and how eventually the constant stimuli just creates a numbness to it and you have to find new thrills. It's kind of like addiction, really, is what we're witnessing.
Hmm.
People addicted to the party, the sweet life of Zach and Cody. They're just trying to they're just trying to find the next cheap thrill. Well, for them, the expensive thrill because, they can afford it. And I wanted to wait until we got to this scene, but this is the scene to me that feels the most like Pasolini had something involved in with the writing.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know if you
I
agree or
I
not.
mean, I've seen. I'm not very well versed on Pasolini, but I can see it. I can see how it could be because it's a little bit more cynical,
Yeah.
and there's this religious aspect to the scene as well, where he's talking to Madalena, you know, but she's in the other side of this echo chamber type stuff. So he's he's speaking with her, and I think she can see him, but he cannot see her. So it's like these boys from the Villon, you know. It's like it's another comparison between a woman and the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
And yeah, and he says that he'll marry her, completely forgetting about his fiancee Emma.
I don't think he means it though, of course. I think
Yeah,
he's just saying it so he can make love with her at the end of the night.
maybe so, but I think maybe there's a chance that he's just confused on what he wants and he's just throwing darts at the wall. one of those darts being, "Will you marry me?"
Yeah,
Um,
that's definitely a dart he tries to throw, and then he ends up throwing more darts throughout the night. But
yeah, and then
um,
he goes with Jane, a
to
British
me,
heiress.
this sequence feels a lot like Diorama from Pasolini. Um,
Okay, interesting.
the
I love
aspect
cinema.
of yeah, the aspect of this guy entering this family party that's happening at I assume it's like a lavish castle that they're staying at.
Yeah, as if it was like
And
an Airbnb.
yeah, and eventually Marcello's just making his way throughout the family members, trying to see which one he can connect to the most. Of course, once he sees Maddalena, he of course latches onto her. He's most familiar with her. He knows he can get a thrill of the night with her. But once she rejects him, he begins to move on to this family, seeing who he'll essentially, I think, sleep with, because there are multiple women
Hmm.
he flirts with before he settles on Jane. And Jane herself doesn't really have any sort of connection to Marcello at all throughout the film, but or sorry, throughout the scene, but up until the very end where she just shrugs and is like, "Okay, well, guess I'll be with you." I don't know, just the whole aspect of a stranger entering this lavish party and just moving throughout this bourgeoisie family, kind of picking them apart to see who he'll have sex with. I mean, that's basically what Teorema's about in a nutshell. Teorema also focuses on the aftermath of that, but we don't see that. We kind of get a dawn, but the dawn, the consequence really is just their boredom and just
Yeah.
what to do next.
Hmm. There's not much to draw from. Like they really are just bored. There is no struggle. They
No,
have no real struggle.
yes, actually,
Um,
yeah, I wanted to bring that up because we see with Marcello, he's living the sweet life through his job, through his profession. So there is some
mhm.
sort of drive, work, and goal to it. There is some sort of meaning behind it. If, like, funny enough, there is a meaning to the absurdity of his life. But for this family, this aristocrat family, they're just living off this money that's probably from generations of hard work, and they don't have to work at all anymore. The sweet life
Yeah.
is their work. Like the party is their work and their job, and they're trying to make fun of it. They're trying to make as much light of it as they can, but the light is just burnt out throughout these years and throughout possibly these generations of family. Like the really old woman in the family who pays no mind. God, she's so fucking bored. She's like Lady Olenna. She's literally been living the sweet life her whole life and has just become a complete bitter human being who can't even be bothered to say hello to anyone new because this is probably the 30,000th person she's met in her life throughout parties.
Yeah, but there's also the aspect that truly the sweet life couldn't be lived in the same way 20, 15 years ago, or even like 8 years ago because of the economic
True.
downturn that Italy was going through, and of course the war. So I feel like it's even more telling how this quote unquote sweet life has this expiration date, and it's so close. It's not you don't have to have been part of this quote unquote high society for 30 years. Like this society, at least the way it works here, which of course, I mean, it's not like there were no rich people in Italy during the 1940s. Of course there were. And
No.
it was not like there was no like there was a lot of inequality, but the level of inequality was not at the same levels as it is then. And then there's the irony of them being in this ruined castle, or at least it looks like it's ruins. Maybe I'm confusing it with another scene in the film, but I'm pretty sure it's the ruins. And of
It's
course, I'm
it's
not.
it's pretty dilapidated, yeah.
Yeah, so like it's ironic how the state of the castle itself is not really does not really affect its value towards these people. It's just like the irony of a place, of them being in a place that's supposedly so expensive when it actually looks like a lot of places that aren't luxurious at all, and they could throw a massive party where they would actually have fun, but all these social rules don't really let them, and it's just like 10 people there being
It's
bored
like
and
it's
drunk.
like they've been up their ass of exclusivity for so long that it's become a damnation to the idea of fun for them.
Yeah, thank you.
It
That's
really
a great way
has.
of putting it.
I don't know why this thought just came into my head just because of how I really am trying to view this scene through a Pasolini lens. But what if this family is like, I'm thinking this family is wealthy through generations, and so they've just become bored of the sweet life because that's their job. What if these
Mhm.
people benefited off of World War II and that they're
Hmm.
this is kind of like we're viewing, like, I don't know, fascists that are living off the excess wealth that they've benefited from Mussolini's reign, but they're able to get out because they didn't really have any noticeable part in the annihilation of humanity, but they still benefited off of it. So they're still in the high society, they're still wealthy for the rest of their days, but they're living their life with no purpose anymore and they don't care anymore and they're
I
just living through this party. I don't know. It's just a thought that went in my head. Like, what if some of these
yeah,
rich people? What if some of these rich people are just ex-Nazis because that they're old enough to
yeah. There's
definitely have lived through that
fascists.
time and benefited off of that. Yeah,
I mean, they are benefiting off of that just by the mere factor that World War II caused these new revolutions and the exporting of the free market and the exporting of like this the capitalistic ideas going everywhere in the world, and these people are in the benefiting side from that. Their
yeah,
their lives are probably better right now, or at least more comfortable right now than they were in a pre-World War II era.
for
Or
sure.
maybe we're wrong, and these people are actually old, like what some people would call old money. And in that case, they might really have been fascists and supporters of Mussolini's party.
You
But yeah,
know,
it's
my headcanon was I
mhm,
made my headcanon, that Marcello was thinking fondly while writing his little
novel.
manuscript, yeah, his novel. My other headcanon is that these people are a bunch of ex-Nazis that he's hanging out with and that they're just living. It's like the four guys from Salo, just their children just hanging off on the trust funds and hanging out in this dilapidated castle, and they see the world crumbling around them, but they don't care because they're just existing in their excess and indulgence.
It's like Fellini himself saying, pointing at the rotten core of this high society.
Yes,
And
exactly.
yeah, and speaking of like these rotten cores that we're talking about, the next scene that we're heading into is Marcello getting into a massive fight with his fiancee Emma in the middle of the road. And this scene is so violent in the way it's filmed, and it looks so beautiful. But you can really feel all the tension between these people all throughout the filmmaking. I think it's very effective in that way. And one of the things that it makes me think about is so much of the structure of the film, how it's not really a straightforward narrative outside of some select cases. We're talking about this earlier about how if the movie's in chronological order or not, and all these things. But like, I think you could arguably shuffle the episodes around in whatever order, and the movie won't lose that much from that. But the way they arranged it, I think books no argument. The way Fellini edited and the way the film is written with these things that lead to that thing and leads to that thing and all these things. I think they book no argument because they're all kind of about pushing Marcello farther and farther down toward his breaking point, leading to where he will lead himself at the end of the movie. And another interesting thing about this scene is that this is the last time we see Emma as well. So I think there's three major female characters in the movie. So we have Madalena, we have Sylvia, and we have Emma. Sylvia was the first one we said goodbye to, and she's also the last one we meet. She's the one that's in the movie for the least amount of time. And of course, she leaves the film abruptly. She walks into her hotel room. We never see her again. The second one is Madalena, who is the first one we meet very early on. In the same night, we meet Emma in real life with Marcello, and then we meet Emma through the phone and like through action that's happening at the same time, but it's not taking place in the same place. So Madalena gets introduced to us in this. I don't remember the name of the club, but in this club before she leaves with Marcello. And then Madalena has also left the movie already. She left in the party scene. That's her last scene where she's talking with Marcello through the echo chamber. He says, "Will you marry me?" She says she doesn't answer because she's making out with another guy, and that's the last we see of Madalena. And then the first time we see Emma, she's struggling and she's in her room, probably wondering when Marcello is coming home, and she's upset, and we have this sense of tragedy to her, and this is the goodbye that her character gets. It's by far, I think, the bleakest of the three, but they're all very bleak, because Sylvia gets physically abused by her boyfriend. Madalena, of course, is lying in the other room, completely indifferent towards what Marcello is saying, and then Madeleine and then Emma gets into this huge fight with Marcello, and it's kind of powerful how we're seeing these, how Marcello's, how the women in Marcello's lives, none of them get a happy ending. None of them get any sort of release from being in the movie, from their relationships to Marcello. They kind of all lead to negative things. In Madalena's case, it's more arguable because Madalena is not as major, or she is as major, but she doesn't show the same amount of interest in Marcello as someone like Emma does. And so it's this thing how he really hasn't made that much of an impact in these women outside of a negative impact, which is very sad for his character. And like this is the goodbye towards his relationship with most women in the movie.
I did think that this scene would come to a boiling point. I knew that after seeing Emma constantly being shunned and um, taken advantage of and almost abused in a sense by Marcello throughout the course of the film, there was bound to be a scene like this where they would crack. And this isn't to say that this is the first time the two have probably been at odds with each other. They've most likely had this tussle multiple times, and it feels like one of those toxic relationships you'd see, or you've been a part of, where they keep coming back even after you've said the unsaid, and it almost feels like all ties are cut, yet they'll still find a way to crawl back to you because of their um, codependency that they're struggling with. At least Emma is definitely suffering from codependency and cannot imagine herself living in a world without Marcello by her side. And I agree with you because you said earlier at the beginning that most of the scenes in La Dolce Vita could totally be shuffled um, and moved around. It feels like the movie version of a Spotify playlist where you can just reshuffle the songs and it'll still play the same tune. Of course,
Mhm.
the final scene is the final scene. I wouldn't change that. That would be the most out of place. Yet,
Of course, yeah,
yet
definitely.
you could really reshuffle anything. You could have the scene play after the night with Sylvia. You could have this play after he discovers Steiner has, done the deed. You could play this after they leave from the Virgin Mary and the tramplings. It can be placed anywhere and it still narratively works to Marcello's life and the downward spiral that it's becoming, and we're witnessing it before our very eyes. Of course, it's very gradual, but I agree with you in the sense that the film flows in a way that you could do something like that and it would still be told in a very compelling fashion. And yeah, we do witness their goodbyes, sadly. Although this isn't technically the final scene we see of her, she is in the next
No.
scene. But this
Mhm.
is the final scene where she has spoken dialogue and you really get a feel for her character and her place in the world and in the story. Um,
Yeah,
it's a really
and,
it's a really powerful moment too, I agree, when the two of them are at odds and you really do see how selfish Marcello feels and how it almost seems like he's bored of their relationship at this point. He's bored of what she even has to say to him, so he just leaves her out in the dust.
yeah, and, as to what you were saying too about the way you can shuffle the scenes around, I think it's indicative of how Marcello's life has no order, and it has no direction. So he's just doing all these things, and they are kinda somehow getting in his brain. Like, he's processing all these things, but they aren't really changing his behavior from one scene to the next. We do see how he's, like, yeah, working more and more towards his breaking point, but I have no doubt that Marcello, and this movie takes place, what, 2 hours and 20 minutes into the movie? This scene, I have no doubt in my mind that Marcello will probably behave the exact same way in the first 15 minutes of the movie. And it's like been 2 hours and 20 minutes, or well, 2 hours since that exact moment. It's a, a way in which his life is, the tragedy of his life is like amplified. And as you said, there's a next scene following this with Emma, where Emma is caressing Marcello. They're both laying in bed, they're having this intimate moment, and then Marcello receives a call. And then he rushes to Steiner's apartment, where he learns that Steiner, his idol, this one person whom he actually respected and looked up to, has killed both of his children, and then he shot himself. And then Marcello and the police both are waiting for Steiner's wife to come home and then share the news with her as they get like swarmed by paparazzis. We never truly get to see anything beyond that. This is the last mention we have of Steiner. It's a shocking moment. It's a shocking scene for the audience, for Marcello, for everyone.
It does take you by surprise when that moment happens because
Yeah.
after getting such a merciless argument scene between Marcello and Emma, you feel like you can take a breath of fresh air as an audience. You can have a sigh of relief when you notice the two of them. At least they've reconciled and they're sleeping in bed together. Of course, we know that this is a powder keg ready to blow again, but for the moment, for the time being, you feel like you can be at peace until the phone rings and just like Marcello, we as an audience are kind of reawakened and intrigued at what's going to happen next. And like you said, no one expects this to happen, not even Marcello himself when he goes to Steiner's apartment. And it's revealed that he committed one of the worst acts you could do as a human being, not only taking your life, but taking your children's with you. And seeing all the police rushing around his apartment that Marcello had become so familiar with and so enveloped in his mind as the pristine environment to live your life, and he's seeing it just being completely picked apart. And it's almost like his brain is being fully rewired at this point to understand that warning that Steiner gave to him at his party, saying, "Do not pursue this life." And you understand just how much Steiner truly was suffering. I guess in a sense we are saying goodbye to his character as well, and with his
Mhm.
character, we are also saying goodbye to that opportunity Marcello was once questioning with himself to move on and to settle down and to pursue his writing or pursue some sort of passion with the same sort of philosophy Steiner was sticking with in his life. Marcello now feels
Yeah.
like he's been betrayed by his idol and betrayed by this entire notion and mindset now. Like you said, yeah, it's just one of the final nails in the coffin of his life in that downward
Mhm.
spiral.
Yeah, it pushes Marcello further down the hole of uncertainty and not knowing what to do with his own life, since every path seems to be the wrong one and ending in tragedy, you know. You could argue Steiner was a path, and Sylvia was a path, and Madalena was a path, but all those doors are getting closed and closed and closed. None of them, none of those are viable options. None of those will lead to his happiness.
Yeah. And this isn't to say that it's anyone's fault for these doors closing. It's purely Marcello's fault himself because he's unable to really make a decision for himself. He's very indecisive and very confused at what he wants to do. And maybe this is almost like a warning to the audience themselves that if you're met with a choice in life, should you take it instantly without any thought? And to wonder where, if all these doors start closing, will you never see a door again? And pretty soon you'll realize time passes by and you've lost any of those opportunities and chances that you once had at a different life, at a better life. And Marcello, he does eventually make a decision, which is no decision at all. And
Yeah.
is probably the most depressing route he could take is just to live a life of stasis. And yes, I
Mm-hmm.
agree that scene where the paparazzi's chasing down Steiner's wife as Marcello rushes to her and sees the police break the news to her. It's just really haunting and kind of
Yes.
chilling at how yeah,
Unempathetic.
how immoral these people have truly become when Steiner isn't even like a popular celebrity or anyone. It's not like Sylvia committing suicide. This is just like kind of a sort of an aristocratic, but he's like a lesser, he's kind of still down to earth and more normal. And so seeing these people treat him like some sort of event to be held on the front page and they have to get her reactions to it. It's just so disheartening.
It's it's devastating. This movie also works as like the final dawn of the film. Of course, there's another scene following, but there is something to the fact that we have the last scene with with the discussion in the argument in the car, and you can still feel the passion that was there in the previous nights, but it's no longer a romantic passion or a happy passion or any sort of that type of passion. It's just rage, and it's between the person whom Marcello was kind of settling down with Emma, and now the next morning, or at least we think it's the next morning, but when he's with Emma, he gets these news, and it's so brutal for what their characters were doing. As to the other things you were saying about Steiner's wife and the paparazzi, because like yeah, as Steiner's wife gets swarmed up with the paparazzi there, it's like an incredibly genius and devastating moment in which she gets sort of a welcome to the tabloids world and to this jungle that it's Rome. The paparazzi run at her and she tries to tell them that she's not an actress, but that she's flattered they would confuse her with one, only for it to dawn on her that she is the person they are looking for. That something horrible must have happened. It's like a heartbreaking moment of a person who stops becoming human and she becomes some sort of news headline, and that happens without her consent, of course, as if she were being devoured by like 100 little monsters in like a corny adventure movie. When she realizes that they're not looking for an actress, that she's not getting confused, that they are looking for her, it's haunting. Like what is going on?
Yeah. It's just a really a really depressing thing to see and you'd think that this is the lowest it can go, but that's sadly not the
Yeah,
case.
I was just gonna say as a final note for this, like Steiner was supposed to be one of those people living the sweet life. If anybody was living it in the movie, it was like it was Steiner. You
Yeah.
know, he seemed to have the perfect life with the perfect children, a beautiful house filled with intellectual guests from all over the world, and yeah, it all went crashing down.
Just goes to show this might be the rotten life, like you said, rotten to the core.
And yeah, this leads us to
The final
the
scene.
final episode.
Yeah. We at this
Yeah, the
point we have no idea what's going to come next, and we assume it's just another night out on the town, another party, because it starts off with a parade of cars driving through the night. And on my first impression I was wondering, oh, is this a continuation of the scene we saw? Is this Marcello chasing down the wife? Is this something going on? What's happening? What's Marcello up to? And it's kind of unveiling, like a mystery being told. The cars pull in front of a house, a mansion in the middle of the woods that seems to be abandoned. And they all get out. It's a group of people partying. They're definitely inebriated on some sort of narcotic or alcohol of some fashion. And they hop over the fence and throw, I believe, a rock, just something into the sliding
yeah,
door, and just essentially break into this person's house and start a party within. And among these people, unexpectedly, is an aged Marcello, a white hair, more wrinkled and tired, and wearing this lavish velvety suit. He doesn't seem to really belong in this sort of crowd, yet he's just this he seems as though he's living this life now. This is what his existence has amounted to. And we
mhm,
don't know exactly what happened with Emma. All we can assume is she's no longer part of his life. We don't see a wedding ring on his finger. We see drugs, we see alcohol, we see all these people partying, and a woman playing a stripping game, but no one seems to really care about her. I believe they play the exact same song that Paula played on the jukebox earlier on, which was
they
her
do,
her
yeah.
stripping song. I guess it's
Mhm.
her stripping song, but Marcello, after noticing how bored people have become at this party, insinuates, he tries to insinuate an orgy to occur, which it doesn't really go well. The owner of the house returns and essentially kicks everyone out because he has to leave the next morning. He doesn't really seem bothered by the shattered glass on the floor or the nude women on the ground. He or the parading and bullying that Marcello is doing by riding a woman like a horse. He doesn't really seem to worry much about that. It's more like, hey, you guys got to leave because I'm gonna be gone. And I can totally understand how he would feel. I personally would be very pissed, but we don't really know much about this man other than
No,
he knows
you don't.
Marcello. He knows where his life is amounted. He's no longer a journalist. He's what is he? He's like a proprietor
He,
almost, like an entertainment
he's
guy.
yeah, he's like an agent, so a sort of probably affiliated with the more gossip side of celebrity culture. Yeah, what's so interesting about that is that journalism at least was this bridge, you know. It was this bridge between being an author and being a part of the quote unquote sweet life. But now that bridge was broken. He's no longer a journalist. He went completely towards, he fell fully towards the temptation. He's, yeah, just lusting. He's taking up on these job that makes him be a part of this even more corrupt society than the ones he had been a part of before. I mean, you mentioned how they break into the house. It's Marcello himself, the one who throws the rock at the window that ends up breaking the door and letting them in.
I see.
So interesting because Marcello really acts differently in this scene compared to the others, and he's changed and has become more cynical version of one of who he once was.
Yeah.
And of course, Fellini is trying to ask us what has happened to him. The answer is kind of like nothing, you know. He never took agency. He never took responsibility upon himself. He just let life go through him. He ignored those who loved him, and he let himself be led on by his desires.
Now he's just like Leonardo DiCaprio at a party, just this 50-year-old dude hitting on girls in their 20s. Like it's just pathetic now. He's just he reeks of patheticism. Like there's nothing
Yeah.
There's nothing alluring or charming about the way he lives anymore. Any amount of allure or charm to his character is just completely vanquished with time and with his, like you said, cynical descent into absurdism. And he's reckless now. He's truly become just a reckless shell of who he once was. And like you said, his one gateway, his one segue to being considered at all successful or serious was his journalism, because it was a form of creative writing, but now he's just completely abandoned that. And he's also abandoned the truth because several actors that are partygoers in that scene ask him how much it would cost for them to write a review about him, comparing him to Marlon Brando. And he said, "Oh, a lot." He said, what, like 10,000 or something. It's just a really high number. It just goes to show how he's given up on any sort of truth to be told. He's now just like those that he kind of loathed at one point. He's become what he's hated and despised.
Yeah, he's become this publicity agent. To me, the most tragic aspect of this is how and this is something that happens all throughout the film, it's a theme throughout, but he's only letting himself desire something that he knew he would never be able to get. He's made his goal out of reach so that, or or he set goals to himself that are out of his own reach, so he doesn't even have to try to achieve them or accomplish them. And yeah, he's basically just sitting there letting the drugs and the alcohol and the sex, like, yeah, those are part of his routine now. That's all he is, and that's all his life is gonna be from now on. And of course, in the scene, they're celebrating. It's very twisted because they're celebrating Nadia, who is a woman we don't know, and she just divorced her husband Ricardo, and Ricardo is the owner of the house. And so yeah, she begins to strip to the song Patricia by Perez Prado, the one you mentioned. And by doing this, Fellini is sort of like mocking this his earlier scene and also reminding us of it. Marcello was with the angels, but now he's with the demons.
Exactly. Yeah. What was once considered pure is now just the bottom of the barrel of morality.
Yeah, and in this twilight of the film, it's this is like the craziest of nights. It has breaking and entering, it has harassment. Marcello is just humping a random woman, and we see the consequences of that night happening within that scene. There's no cut like in the other ones. The craziness is not the cause anymore. It's now the consequences of Marcello's inability to care for others or pursue his own ambitions.
Yep.
He's falling into this endless pit of lust, and these uncomfortable nights is all there is left to him. And this really doesn't come across as passion. It just comes across as a kind of a waste of time, waiting for time to be over. The things he was passionate about, like his writing, and even if he was struggling with writer's block, a theme that Fellini also explores later in movies like Eight and a Half, he's no longer pursuing that infinite passion of life. He's just letting everything pass through him,
Yeah.
and that's his life now.
Yeah.
And it's a lost life, even though it would be considered by most of us something to idolize because of how successful he is in a very superficial way. It's breaking down that life and how unpleasant it truly is for those who live it and how not worth living it is. There's nothing to pursue within the Dolce Vita.
It definitely feels empty and just devoid of any sort of joy or purity that once was. And it's
Hmm.
not officially revealed how many years it's been since the earlier sequences of the film, but you can only assume that it's been possibly a decade, maybe a little more.
Maybe so. Yeah, he has white hair.
It makes you wonder if these scenes all took place in like separate years, all the years that took for him to descend into where he is left at the end of the film. But I don't know. It's a really intense just switch up narratively. to see something like this
Hmm.
happen after all of this lavish partying and insane kooky shenanigans and characters. We finally get to see just where it all ends up for him. Yeah, I can't help but feel depressed or just feel like I don't know, disappointed in him really for realizing that this is where he's decided his life will lead.
Yeah, and in the final dawn of the film, the true final dawn of the film, that, as I said, it's within the same sequence. They do go outside, so it is a different scene, but there is not a real, there is no transition period anymore. This is the same thing. So, and the party proceeds to the beach
Yeah.
at dawn where they find a strange looking fish. Yeah.
It's almost like they're in a trance with the way they just autopilot to the beach. It's like they didn't even realize that the beach even existed outside of the house, and it's almost like they're being lured to the beach all at once. They're not even making a decision for themselves. They don't even talk about it. They all just do it because they're essentially aimless. The party's over, so what do they have left in their lives? What do they do with themselves other than to just walk aimlessly and
Yeah.
wander as this collective school of fish, just looking for the next bite to eat, the next morsel of absurdity. And what do you know, there happens to be a literal dead fish on the beach that's accompanying them, almost like he is
Hmm.
the embodiment of the life fully drained from the party. Yeah,
Yeah.
at first when I was
And
watching it, I was like, what kind of leviathan is this on the beach? But yeah,
mhm.
it's a stingray that they just found on the beach while filming, and it just acts as a perfect cherry on top to this finale. But sorry, you continue. I just
Yeah.
wanted to talk about that real quick.
Yeah, after they find the fish, and like you said, they're just stumbling upon these things. Not only the crew and the cast and the people making the film, but the characters themselves. We see Paula, the adolescent waitress from the seaside restaurant, and she calls to Marcello from across an estuary, but the words they exchange are lost on the wind, drowned out by the crashing waves, and he signals his inability to understand what she's trying to say or interpret her gestures. He just shrugs and returns to the partygoers. One of the women joins him and they hold their hands as they walk away from the beach. In a long final close up, we see as Paola waves to Marcello and then stands watching him with like a weird enigmatic smile. And that's the final shot of the movie.
Yeah.
And as to what you were saying,
Doesn't she
oh,
doesn't she actually stop smiling and turn to face the camera with like a straight face after that?
I don't remember that.
I think so. I don't know. I could look it up real quick and just see.
Okay, yeah, she kind of does. She turns towards the camera.
It's interesting to see it. It's kind of like the final nail in the coffin that he just doesn't care about any sort of purity that's in his life, because he once compared her to an angel, yet the angel is looking right at him, and that all that purity and and I don't know, innocence that he once viewed as just completely meaningless to him. And it seems like he won't
Hmm.
even be bothered to hear what she has to say. He won't even be bothered to hear what innocence and morality has to say about his actions. He's
Exactly.
just
It's all waved
fully
away.
yeah, he's fully entranced with the sins of his life. And yeah, you could argue, oh, the wind was bothering him, so, well, who gives a fuck? He could just walk right over to her and then talk to her. It's not like the party was still going on. They all got kicked out. They have nothing left to do. It's purely it just shows another representation of his character, of that lack of agency, like you said, that he just will not even try anymore to make any sort of decision because he lets life do it for him, and in a sense, he loses his life by doing that.
Yeah. And it parallels the beginning a lot, where Marcello is, I mean, in this scene, he's seemingly unable to listen to his angel and then just leaves and falls with this quote unquote demon. But at the beginning of the film, he's in the helicopter and he cannot listen to the girls in the bikinis, right? He cannot listen to them. He's trying to make an effort. He's trying to say like, "Oh, give me your number, whatever." But they can't listen to each other, and he's following Jesus and all these things. This is like the little bow that gets tied at the end, where he at the beginning was like quite literally following Jesus, and he was tempted and distracted by sex and women and stuff like that, and that kind of sends him into the path that he goes throughout the movie. And now at the end, he is with the sex and the women and all these things, and he gets tempted to go, or maybe not tempted, but his attention gets called out by his angel, and he doesn't listen to it like he did. Like he's like, oh, kind of happy to see her, assuming that he remembers her. There's no way it's been that long because she's the same age, unless she is the virgin herself. She was like a 15-year-old
Yeah,
girl. She's still a 15-year-old girl.
yeah, maybe that might be the
And
case.
it might even maybe pose the question of if Marcello is going to go on the same way backwards, as as some sort of redemption. But I doubt it, because he persisted. In the beginning, he persisted in the helicopter, and he let the other helicopter that was carrying Jesus go. But now, he's not. He just leaves it be. He makes no effort, and he just leaves. And as to the fish, there are two things I wanted to bring up about the fish. And like, yeah, like you said, the fish is kind of reminiscent of a leviathan, this manifestation of chaos, and a creature that eats the damned soul of sinners. And it's all arriving in the last moments of Marcello's life, or at least in the film, Marcello's life in the film. After all goodness has been taken away, the leviathan is almost the same creature as Marcello is now. And then on the other hand, a thing I've been hearing that the fish might allude to is the Wilma Montesi case, which might seem weird as hell.
Oh,
But this is the story of a young woman whose body was found on a beach near Rome, an event which led to the investigations from the Roman police and press on sex scandals, orgies, and drugs in relation to politicians and members of the Roman high
oh,
society.
yeah. I heard about that when I was researching this film. I forgot about that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and like in a different way, the fish might not represent the horrors of what's to come, but the victims of the society we've been observing for the past 3 hours.
Yeah, that's a great tidbit of information to give, Eugene. Thank you.
It's not like a coincidence, of course. The Wilma Montesi case happened way before the film was shot
Yeah,
and made and even conceived. Yeah, I think that's about it for La Dolce Vita. We went almost not scene by scene necessarily, but we went moment by moment almost.
yeah. I feel very mentally exhausted going through all of that. It's a very long film. I can only imagine how long it'd take for one of these later films like I don't know, Sutton Tongo or
Yeah,
that Godard film that's just a million years long, or The Return.
yeah. Oh, the
The
return.
Return.
There needs to be some.
We
Yeah,
we have to dedicate an episode to each episode of The Return. It seems like
literally. You could make an entire podcast just
you
about the
could.
return.
It's almost like there
Same
is
with
one out there.
same with Jack Clivet's Out One, all these 13-hour plus movies.
Oh yeah,
Because yeah, this is not. I mean, it's a long movie, but it's not near the longest movie in the Sight and Sound list.
oh, and thank God for it being told episodically like this. It actually made for a much easier analysis, I think,
Yeah,
because we can
and
separate each scene and still, you know, work backwards with it and still keep up that pace and keep it in order. I don't know. I just really appreciate the way this film was put together and edited. It made it a lot more memorable for me and easier for me to keep track of what was going on, which I appreciate.
yeah, and as a final thing, I wanted to ask a question, but it's a long question that would get us into a rabbit hole. So it's more of a question for the audience. I always think that it's good to have a final question after a discussion in regards to a piece of art, so that you never see whatever sort of media that you're watching about that certain film as your own conclusion to the engagement with that film. I don't know if I am explaining myself correctly, but basically to set up an example, I just think it's lame to watch a movie and then go on YouTube, watch the, I don't know, Oppenheimer explained video essay, and then never think about Oppenheimer ever again.
Yeah.
So, as a question I wanted to ask is, how do you guys think that the movie is making a parallel between Fellini and the paparazzi, given that they're both storytellers trying to capture specific moments in the lives of the characters of La Dolce Vita? It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, how the art of journalism compares to the art of filmmaking or documentary filmmaking or just fictional filmmaking. As in they both share a lot of similarities. And what is the movie trying to say about that specific topic?
Mm, yeah. I guess we'll find out in the comments down below, huh?
A video essay.
A video essay. Leave a video essay down in the comments below. I got
And well, as a final question now to you, Bill, how has this film been a part of your life at all? You know, you've mentioned before that this is your third time watching it.
yeah. I
So, yeah, go
I
ahead.
remember I watched it a few years ago to get involved with Fellini and to kind of understand his his mind. You know, I'd always heard of his movies before, but I'd never seen one up until La Dolce Vita, which was my first. I watched this one and then I believe I watched Eight and a Half and then La Strada. And of course, La Strada is my favorite. Absolutely love that film. It is in my top 150 favorites. But La Dolce Vita was very slow for me on a first watch. And I didn't know about his style back then. I knew about the word Fellini-esque, much like I knew about Lynchian, but I didn't see, I hadn't seen any of his work prior, so it was very jarring, you know, on a first watch, and a little, I don't know, a little meandering for me, but I'm really glad that I rewatched it because it made me appreciate the film a lot more. I think that all of the movies I've seen for our podcast so far has made me appreciate it even more. Maybe you could argue it's a form of Stockholm syndrome because I'm kind of forcing myself to research this film and read essays on it and try to get in the mindset of people who revere it as a masterpiece. So in doing so, I'm left with those thoughts and, you know, Wizard of Oz was a lot easier to revere because of its notoriety. Wanda was just this whiplash of a film that I absolutely love for its transgressions and its revelatory filmmaking style for the time and just the fact that it was a woman behind the camera who had never directed anything before in her life and yet was able to accomplish so much with her first and only film. And so with La Dolce Vita, rewatching it, I I I was just in the mindset like, okay, this is just another Fellini movie. I've already seen the best, you know, the best ones, Nights at Cabiria, Eight and a Half, La Strada. But I really appreciate this movie a lot more on the rewatch. I'm very glad that we were able to discuss it. It is a shame that Little Souffle was not here to accompany us, but I'll always hold this film in my heart for this moment we've been able to share together, Eugenio. I'm glad we were able to share it together.
For sure. Yeah, I'm so thankful that we're able to discuss this movie. And like I said, this is my first time watching this movie. I'm not extremely well versed on Fellini. Of course, I've only seen what, four of his films, maybe five. And this has always been one of my biggest blind spots in terms of the most acclaimed fictional films, especially when it comes to the more mainstream side of art house cinema. And most definitely the most popular art house film I have never seen, or I had never seen. But it was, so I can't say it was a pleasant surprise because it wasn't really a surprise that I enjoyed it as much as I did, but it truly connected with me in all of its themes. And I think it's a joy to watch and sit through. And those 3 hours, at least in my case, I felt like they went by flying. It's a very dense film, which is a word we've used a lot in this podcast, but it's also a very rich film and it's very full. I can't wait to be like you and have watched it 3 times.
Oh, I don't know. Hold on. Cuidado.
But yeah, I guess that'll be about it for now for La Dolce Vita, which leads us to our last segment, if you will,
Oh boy.
where we're gonna. I mean, since Souffle is not here, he's not getting a chance
Oh,
to put a film on the wheel. But and so let's see, what film are you? What film do you want to discuss for the Sight and Sound film? From the Sight and Sound film?
let me
What
see.
film do you want to discuss from the Sight and Sound list next week? There you go.
Let me see. I call me a little selfish. I'm pulling a Marcello here and I'm picking a film that's under 90 minutes long. I'm kind of wanting a nice change of pace for our runtimes. I'm going to go with Brief Encounter from 1945, directed by David Lean. I have seen this movie before. I own the Criterion Blu-ray. Best believe I've often considered this movie the original version of In the Mood for Love, that famous film by Wong Kar-wai. So I'm
Hmm.
going to be wrecking Brief Encounter. We're going old school. And by the way, Eugenio, I have the wheel that I will be recording and
Okay,
its spin. What's your pick?
that's a fantastic film on your end. I want to pick a film I've never seen before. I'll just say the name. I think I'm gonna rank My Neighbor Totoro, film directed by Hayao Miyazaki. No, wait, what? Okay, I'm gonna redo that because I have seen that movie.
a
Okay,
very
cut the
a
cameras.
very niche indie film,
A
underground.
very niche indie film. That was not the movie I was trying to say.
Okay,
I just
that's all
saw it
right.
and my mind got jumbled up. So the movie I actually wanted to recommend. I was thinking, how about we watch our first documentary we discussed here?
Ooh,
And I was thinking maybe I should rec Agnes Varda's The Gleaners and I.
oh, that's ironic because I was thinking of wrecking Le Bonheur, which is from Varda as
Varda.
well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Those are two great picks, honestly. I'd be happy with either one. All right. I
Okay.
I've got the wheel. Trust me, bro. All right. I'm going to spin whatever it lands on. We're going to decide for the next episode and I don't know. I'm hyped. Are you hyped?
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Okay. I'm going to spin in 3, 2, 1. Oh shit. Oh shit. What is it? It is oh my God, that's so close. Okay. It is the Gleaners and I. Congratulations, Eugene. You won again, back to back with the wins.
Hell yeah. Can't wait to discuss Varda.
Yep, an Agnes Varda documentary. Very exciting.
Can't wait.
Can't wait. Agnes Varda. Wow, Varda for the 4th episode. That's going to be huge.
Yeah, we're going Fellini to Varda. It's a big move. It's the most recent film we've discussed. Not that it's really a tough a tough challenge,
No.
because the newer film we had discussed up until this point was Wanda from 1970. It's a welcome to a newer era of filmmaking.
Yeah, France. We're going French this time.
For the first time, a country that will appear a lot more times
Holy
during this
fuck.
list.
I cannot stress how much this fucking country is going to show up in this series. It's going to be insane. I mean,
Yep.
I did tease that dozen-hour long Godard documentary thing that he has going on.
To be fair, France is one of the most important countries in film history,
Yeah,
arguably the
yeah,
country
I
where
know.
film itself originated from.
Well, we
So,
need Ridley Scott in here. He'll tell it how it is.
yeah, Napoleon. Okay, so that'll be it for next week. Oh, where can we watch the Gleaners and I? It's in the Criterion
I
channel.
believe Criterion Channel. I think it's also on Max in the States. And there could be a YouTube link out there. Varda is pretty accessible, I'd say, especially contemporary
Yeah.
Varda. But yeah, thank you everyone for watching this episode. Shout out to those who stayed all the way, or shout out to the ones who skipped all the way to the wheel to hear what would be next.
All 6 hours.
Yeah, all 6 hours. It's I've been watching War and Peace on the background as we've been discussing this. We're now at Andre fighting in the Battle of the Bulge. Pretty cool. Um, uh,
Well, watch out, Andre.
yeah,
Watch
watch
out.
out, watch your feet. Eugenio, what
Bye bye, Yvonne.